Hi guys. Tonight we are going to step with you into a world of snow, silence, and survival. Imagine trudging across a barren white plain beneath the northern stars, your breath forming little clouds that instantly freeze at the edges. The wind nips at your ears, and your boots crunch on hard snow that has lain unbroken for weeks. You are shivering, your fur hood is crusted with ice, and you have that sinking suspicion you probably won't survive this if you keep wandering in the open. Yet just ahead, you see a small dome rising like a pearl in the moonlight, an igloo, the ancient, ingenious shelter that held warmth against impossible odds. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, and let us step inside together. You push through the squeaky snow toward the rounded mound. The stars above seem merciless, each one glittering in a sky so clear it feels close enough to touch. The aurora shivers faintly, green and violet curtains rippling overhead. For a moment, you hesitate. How can snow, something that chills your bones, become a shield against winter? And yet, here stands proof, a rounded shelter carved out of the very thing you fear. Your gloved hand brushes the outside wall, and you realize it isn't just loose powder. The blocks are cut and stacked like a spiral staircase, each pressed against the other so tightly that no wind can snake through the seams. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval Europeans in monasteries and castles sometimes described far-flung Arctic dwellers who built homes of snow, marveling at the idea that white frost could be a house. Their letters sound almost incredulous, as if doubting their own sources. And indeed, historians still argue whether these early written accounts captured real encounters with Inuit peoples, or were second-hand fables brought by Norse traders who wandered northward. You bend low, your body hunching, and crawl toward the tiny opening. It is barely large enough for your shoulders. Deliberately so. A quirky tidbit, the door is dug lower than the floor inside. This means you descend briefly, then rise, so that precious warm air inside pools above your head and doesn't leak out every time someone enters. You shuffle forward on hands and knees, snow rubbing against your mittens, and suddenly the biting wind cuts off. The silence inside hits you first. Then, slowly, you adjust to the bluish glow filtering through the snow walls. Snow doesn't block all light. Instead, it refracts it, scattering it into soft radiance. The igloo feels like the inside of a sapphire, cool but protective. You exhale, and the steam drifts gently upward, not whipped away by icy gusts but lingering. Here, the temperature difference is everything. Outside it may be 40 degrees below freezing, but in here, with bodies and a small lamp, it can hover just below freezing, even rise toward a fragile comfort. You look up. The ceiling is a smooth curve, every block angled inward with geometric precision. The people who shaped these walls learned by practice, stacking snow until mathematics became muscle memory. No mortar, no beams, just snow leaning on snow. And yet it stands. The air smells faintly of musk, fur, oil, damp boots, and you realize this is not just a shelter, it's a lived-in home. Your eyes adjust, and you notice the faint flicker of a lamp near the center. The flame is small, cradled in a soapstone bowl filled with seal oil. It sputters but holds steady, casting a dance of orange across the curved ceiling. The smoke drifts upward, clinging faintly to the snow above, leaving soft shadows like brushstrokes. You hear quiet breathing too, deeper and slower than your own. Someone is sleeping, wrapped in hides, curled against the wall. The rhythmic sound reassures you. You slide further inside, brushing loose snow from your sleeves. The platform where the sleepers lie is raised slightly higher than the floor. Cold air sinks, warm air rises. The builders understood this. Lying above ground level keeps you from shivering all night, pressed against icy snow. You hesitate before joining them, but exhaustion wins. You sit down gingerly, feeling the solid snow beneath the furs. Surprisingly, it isn't wet. Snow that is tightly packed and cold stays dry, at least until warmth starts melting it slowly. You let your head lean back against the curved wall. The snow feels strange, softly rigid, slightly damp, and humming with silence. Your ears, used to howling winds, now pick up subtler sounds. The faint crack of a block shifting as temperatures change, the soft patter of snow crystals falling from boots, and beneath it all, the dull thud of your own heartbeat, slower now, calmer in this cocoon. Still, questions linger. How long can snow last before collapsing? What if the lamp melts too much above? Scholars still debate whether medieval accounts of Arctic snow houses exaggerated their durability, describing them as permanent winter castles, when in fact many were temporary, lasting only a few nights before hunters moved on. The truth, as always, lies in between. Some igloos were fleeting, others carefully tended and repaired, holding families for weeks at a time. For now, none of that matters. You are inside, warm enough, safe for this hour. Your eyelids sag as you imagine those who first invented this brilliant survival trick, sculpting comfort out of frozen misery. And as the oil lamp flickers, you let yourself ease closer to the fur-wrapped sleepers, realizing that the night outside can howl and shriek. But here, in this fragile dome, you might just survive until morning. You are still sitting on that raised snow bench, your breath curling like wisps of smoke, when the thought dawns on you, how could snow, that brittle frozen fluff, possibly hold heat? It seems absurd, almost like trying to make a fire out of water. Yet the very structure that surrounds you is a kind of paradox. Snow is mostly air, trapped between tiny crystals. And air, when stilled, is a remarkable insulator. You feel it now, the difference between the roaring gale outside and the still cocoon inside. The temperature may not be tropical, but it is survivable, and in the Arctic, that counts as luxury. You press your gloved hand against the wall. It doesn't feel cold in the same way ice does. It has a gentle give, like a sponge, because of the countless little bubbles trapped within. That is the secret. Snow is not solid. It is porous, filled with invisible chambers of air that slow the escape of warmth. A mainstream historical fact often shared in survival guides is that soldiers in World War II, stranded in snowy battlefields, rediscovered the insulating power of snow by digging foxholes and covering them, creating crude igloos. They realized what Arctic hunters had known for centuries, that snow can be friend, not foe, if shaped wisely. You glance at the lamp, the tiny flame making a little halo. Even that weak glow radiates warmth, and you notice moisture beading faintly where heat kisses the ceiling. A quirky tidbit. The inside of an igloo can sometimes glaze over with a thin shell of ice, as warmth from bodies and lamps melts the inner snow just enough for it to refreeze. This layer strengthens the whole dome, turning it from a fragile pile into a sturdy fortress. You can almost hear the whispered reassurance of builders who saw the walls harden overnight, knowing their home would stand through storms. Still, scholars remain divided. Historians still argue whether the medieval accounts describing igloos as hot houses were exaggerations of astonished travelers or accurate observations of real comfort. Could a snow dome, in a brutal winter, actually become warm enough to make its occupants sweat? Some researchers insist yes, pointing to thermal studies that show interior temperatures rising to 15 degrees Celsius with enough people and lamps inside. Others doubt, suggesting such numbers only hold in modern experiments and that medieval conditions remained harsher. The debate lingers, unresolved, a reminder of how fragile historical evidence can be. You lie back against the caribou hides, pulling one closer over your chest. The weight presses down, not heavy but firm, and the warmth pools quickly under the cover. Your ears catch the muffled sighs of those already asleep beside you. They are bundled in layers, bodies stacked like firewood, each one another living furnace. The air tastes faintly smoky, tinged with oil, but not unpleasant like the memory of a hearth. You close your eyes for a moment, and it's astonishing how quickly your body begins to believe you are safe. Your mind drifts outward, picturing the builders outside in daylight. You see them cutting blocks from the hard-packed drifts, slicing with bone or metal knives, the edges crisp, each block the size of a child. They hoist them, wedge them, tilt them slightly inward, creating a spiral that winds to the top. No blueprint, no measuring tape, just years of memory and practice guiding each cut. The spiral itself is genius, each block leaning inward against the next, until gravity locks the whole dome like puzzle pieces. The lamp sputters, pulling you back. A droplet of melted snow slides down the curve above, landing with a tiny pat on the hide. You brush it away. The sound is soft, almost reassuring, as though the igloo itself is breathing with you. The walls around you seem to hum with silence, thick silence, the kind that presses on your ears. And in that quiet, you think about how fragile Warmth Island. It isn't blazing fire or roaring stoves. It is small, layered, and cumulative. The hides, the dogs, the people, the lamp, all of it adds up to a bubble of survival. Your toes flex in your boots, and you notice they are no longer numb. The stillness of the igloo has given them time to recover. You wiggle them, almost smiling in the dark, knowing you've bought yourself another night. Outside, the stars still burn cold, and the aurora ripples on, but inside this snow dome, you finally feel the possibility of sleep. You lean back against the firm snow wall, and as your eyes travel upward, you imagine the careful labor that brought these blocks into being. The igloo did not appear magically. It was carved, piece by piece, from the very earth of winter. You picture figures in thick parkas, their breath steaming, cutting neat rectangular chunks from packed snow. A long-handled knife, sometimes bone, sometimes metal traded from distant lands, slices downward with precision. The sound is a hollow crunch, like biting into a frozen apple. Each block is pried out, lifted, and stacked with steady rhythm. One well-documented record from later European expeditions describes explorers stunned by how quickly local hunters could raise a snow dome. They claimed some men could fashion a full igloo in less than an hour. Whether those observers exaggerated is uncertain, but you can easily imagine how muscle memory makes art swift. The builders, after all, had performed this ritual since youth, their hands knowing exactly how to tilt each block, how to shave an edge to fit, how to test the density of the snow by ear alone. There's a curious little note in Inuit oral tradition that some snow was considered singing snow. When cut, it made a high squeak, a tone that signaled it was perfect for building. This odd sensory trick meant that a wall's future strength could be judged not by sight, but by sound. You can almost hear it now, the squeal of snow under the blade, followed by the thud of a block settling into place. A strange measure, but effective. Experts remain divided on how far back this craft truly goes. Was the igloo already in use during the deepest centuries of the medieval period, or did its form evolve later from older, simpler snow shelters? Archaeologists can trace fragments of soapstone lamps and traces of habitation in Arctic digs, but snow itself leaves no direct evidence. It melts, erases itself, denies you the comfort of certainty. The discussion remains open, like so many mysteries in the frozen world. You stretch out on the caribou hide as you imagine the spiral rising higher. Each block must angle inward, leaning on its neighbor, a white staircase winding up into a dome. The top block, the keystone, is the most delicate. It is dropped in with care, and once it clicks into place, the structure becomes self-supporting. Without that crown, the whole might slump inward. With it, the dome becomes a unified shell, surprisingly resistant to weight. Snow can be weak underfoot, yet when shaped correctly, it can hold the press of storms. You feel a strange reassurance in that weakness transformed into resilience. Your mind drifts further. Consider the contrast. While peasants in medieval Europe stacked timber and daub to build smoky huts, here, Above the tree line, where no wood grew, families sculpted their dwellings out of snow itself. Both techniques relied on local materials, but one was rooted in fire and earth, the other in ice and air. It is a reminder that necessity shapes culture as firmly as any king's decree. Inside the igloo, you hear the faint creak of snow as temperatures shift. The dome is alive, breathing, expanding, contracting. Every snap makes your heart jolt, though the others sleeping beside you remain still, unbothered. They trust the structure, because they built it. You are the outsider, imagining collapse at every sound. But gradually you too accept the rhythm. It becomes like a heartbeat, steady, natural part of the night. Your nose catches another detail. The blocks were cut from wind-packed snow, harder than the powder drifting across open plains. If one tried to build from loose flakes, the walls would crumble. That's why builders sought the right drifts. Snow sculpted by storms into dense, layered slabs. Some even claim you could taste the difference, the compact snow crunching on the tongue, while powder vanished instantly. It's a peculiar thought, yet perhaps true. The senses were survival tools here, tuned sharper than yours. You close your eyes, listening to the silent dome around you, and you realize the labor of cutting and stacking was not only functional but almost ceremonial. Every block carried meaning: protection, endurance, continuity. Without them, winter meant death. With them, it meant sleep, dreams, stories. That spiral wall of snow was more than shelter. It was memory, tradition, and proof that humans, in any age, could coax safety from even the most hostile environments. And so, as your body softens into the warmth of hides, you imagine the builders outside, their tools biting the snow, their laughter drifting through frosted air, their backs strong from years of practice. You see them fitting the keystone at last, sealing the dome, stepping back in satisfaction. Then, like you now, they crawled inside, leaving only a small hole for air, a glow for light, and the soft hush of snow to guard their sleep. You feel yourself easing deeper into the furs, but your mind lingers on the peculiar entrance you had crawled through earlier. It was narrow, so narrow you had to shuffle on hands and knees, your breath puffing against the snow as you pushed forward. At first, you might think it was clumsy design, but in fact, it was clever engineering born of countless winters. The entrance mattered just as much as the dome itself, and its tiny size was the difference between shivering misery and bearable warmth. One reliable account from 19th-century explorers describes how they nearly suffocated themselves by digging larger doors into their snow shelters. They discovered quickly that every time someone opened a wide flap, the trapped heat fled like a frightened bird. Small tunnels, by contrast, created a pocket where cold air settled, a kind of natural airlock. When you crawled up into the living space, you had already left the freezing gusts behind. And as you think back on your own entrance, you realize that detail descending then rising is no accident. Warmth floats higher than cold, so the builders shaped the tunnel to sink slightly, letting the chill slide down and stay trapped at the bottom. Here's an odd little observation from old Inuit stories. Children would sometimes play in that low tunnel, hiding from siblings, whispering secrets where the adults above couldn't hear. The entryway doubled as both protection and playground, a reminder that even survival architecture could hold moments of childhood mischief. You smile at the thought, tiny giggles echoing in the dark, the hush of snow walls carrying those sounds. Specialists remain uncertain about the exact variety of entrances used during the medieval centuries. Some reconstructions suggest elaborate, multi-chambered passageways for larger family igloos, while others point to evidence of simple crawl holes blocked by hides at night. The academic conversation hasn't reached consensus, partly because, again, snow leaves no fossil trace. What we know comes from oral tradition, later observation, and scattered notes in explorers' journals. You are left piecing together an image, and maybe that uncertainty makes the story richer, not poorer. You recall vividly the sensation of pushing through that narrow tunnel, Your body had felt clumsy, awkward, like a bear forcing itself into a fox's den. Yet the instant you emerged into the dome, relief washed over you. That transition, the howl of the outside wind vanishing into muffled stillness, was like stepping from chaos into sanctuary. Perhaps that is why the memory still clings. Your gaze drifts toward the small round entry again. From inside it glows faintly with reflected starlight. The cold breath of air that sneaks in now and then brushes your cheek, thin and shy, as if it knows it doesn't belong. You tug the fur closer, and the air warms again. This balance of opening just enough to breathe, but not enough to lose heat, was essential. If you sealed the igloo too tightly, you risked suffocation. If you left it too loose, you risked freezing. Survival lived in that razor-thin compromise. Think about medieval Europe at the same time. In villages, doorways were often drafty, sometimes just cloth flaps. Smoke poured out of them, warmth escaped, and people layered themselves in rough wool to compensate. Here, in the Arctic, the door was not an afterthought but the very heart of the design. No grand entrances, no carved thresholds, just practical physics written in snow. The hushed soundscape reinforces the cleverness. Each time the wind rises, rattling the outer world, the tunnel catches it, funnels it downward, and blunts it before it reaches you. The dome stays serene, a chamber of muted air. You listen to the others breathing around you, steady and slow, while the tunnel whispers like a hollow flute when a gust brushes past. In that moment, you are reminded of something half scientific, half spiritual. A house can feel alive when it interacts with the elements so intimately. And though the passage is small, it also served another purpose. Intruders, whether animal or human, could not easily storm in. A polar bear sniffing around would hesitate to force its bulk through the cramped hole. A stranger approaching at night would have to crawl, making their movements loud and obvious. Safety, warmth, and secrecy all bound up in one simple curve of snow. As you lie there, your eyelids heavier, you imagine the first time a child stepped into such a tunnel centuries ago. They might have laughed, comparing it to burrowing like a seal, sliding through snow with hands pressed forward. Perhaps that sensation gave them a sense of belonging to the Arctic itself, as though humans and animals shared the same instinct of digging dens against winter. A funny, offbeat thought strikes you. The igloo door is humanity's imitation of a foxhole, scaled for families instead of solitary creatures. The experts who study this still cannot completely agree on whether entrances were covered with skin flaps or left bare. Some suggest hides draped at night provided insulation, while others argue that smoke venting demanded at least a partial opening. The matter remains unresolved, and you can almost picture scholars poring over weather logs and oral histories, still chasing answers about a tunnel of snow. It is a small thing, but it carries the weight of survival. You take one last glance toward the faint starlight glowing through the crawl space. That doorway, so humble, so easily overlooked, is the boundary between death and life. Outside, endless white, silence broken only by gales. Inside, a fragile bubble of warmth, and the line between the two is only as wide as your shoulders. It is a threshold worth remembering, the simple genius of crawling into safety through snow. The glow around you shifts subtly, and you notice something enchanting about the way light behaves in this snow-bound world. The igloo is not dark, not exactly. Instead, it holds a bluish aura, a soft radiance that seeps through the curved walls like light filtering through frosted glass. You glance up at the ceiling, and the dome seems alive with faint glimmers, as if the stars outside have been absorbed into the snow. We know from reliable descriptions by later explorers that stepping into such a space felt almost mystical, the daylight outside bending into a cool, even glow. No harsh shadows, no blinding spots, just a gentle wash of blue that wrapped everyone inside. For people who lived through the unrelenting white glare of Arctic sun on snow, that muted hue was a relief, calming the eyes and quieting the mind. You feel it too, your gaze softening, your thoughts slowing. something slightly offbeat. The very snow walls, so dense and curved, often acted as amplifiers of sound. A whisper might carry across the dome more clearly than expected, bouncing from one curve to another. Children were known to giggle at this trick, whispering secrets across the room, as if performing in a private theatre. Imagine being a child, hearing your own voice echo softly, as though the igloo itself were listening. The question of lighting remains a puzzle. Specialists still disagree on how much illumination could be achieved with simple seal oil lamps. Some experiments show that just one small wick might fill the dome with a cozy amber glow, while others argue the spaces must have remained dim, flickering, more shadow than light. The uncertainty lingers, as if the truth itself is hidden in the snow, leaving you to picture the varying possibilities. You watch the flame of the lamp sputtering, fed by fat rendered from seals or whales. Its faint smoke curls upward, darkening patches of the snow ceiling until they look like watercolor brushstrokes. The scent is unmistakable, rich, oily, a little fishy but not unpleasant when your body craves warmth. That smoke, however, always carried risk. Too much, and the dome could become stifling. Not enough ventilation, and you might drift into sleep and never wake again. It is a delicate balance, like everything here. You run your hand across the bedding hides. Their coarse texture scratches your palm, yet underneath lies a yielding softness. The lamp's glow paints them amber, contrasting the cold blue of the snow. You feel caught between two worlds, warmth flickering in shadows and cold radiating from the walls. It's a paradox that defines survival here: heat inside snow, life inside emptiness. You close your eyes and listen. The silence is so complete that even your own breathing feels amplified. Somewhere nearby, a dog shifts, its claws clicking lightly on the packed floor. A child sighs in sleep, and you catch the faint rustle of a hide being pulled tighter. These little noises become part of the music of the igloo, subtle, fragile, almost reverent. You remember how in medieval Europe, light at night came from tallow candles or smoky hearth fires. Both carried their own drawbacks: dripping wax, soot-stained rafters, the constant risk of flame-catching thatch. Here, in the Arctic, the snow itself could not burn. The igloo was flame-proof, a sanctuary against fire as much as against storm. Ironically, one of the safest houses in the medieval world was built entirely from the most fragile material. A curious aside, some stories suggest that hunters traveling alone would carve tiny lamp shelves into the walls, niches where a stone dish could rest without tipping. These miniature alcoves gave the igloo an almost architectural sophistication, like having built-in furniture made entirely of snow. Picture yourself setting a lamp into such a hollow, the flame casting light upward, shadows dancing across the domed ceiling. Even here, in the bleakest winters, people sought not just survival but beauty. The scholars who reconstruct these details wrestle with limited evidence. Archaeologists continue to puzzle over traces of soot found on soapstone lamps, debating how many hours they might have burned each night, how much fuel a family needed for a week, and whether the glow was enough to read by, or only to mark faces in the dark. You smile at the thought whether or not anyone cared about reading. Perhaps all they wanted was to see the comfort of each other's expressions. Your own eyes grow heavy, lulled by the interplay of hues, the blue radiance of snow, the amber flicker of oil, the black shadow of smoke. You feel cocooned in color, sheltered in sound, cradled in scent. Everything about the igloo becomes a sensory symphony, quiet yet profound. You stretch out fully now, the hide creasing beneath your weight. Above you, droplets of melted snow bead and refreeze, catching the lamp's glow like tiny jewels. You wonder idly if medieval visitors, stepping into such a space for the first time, might have thought themselves in a palace of ice, not a simple home. And maybe that was true. It was both palace and den, grandeur and necessity, all at once. As your breathing slows, the dome continues to shimmer with its quiet glow, light through snow, flame through oil, shadow through smoke, it all blends into a lullaby written by the Arctic night. And in that lullaby, you sense the truth. Sometimes survival isn't about grand gestures, but about finding beauty in the dimmest, most fragile of lights. You shift slightly on the layered hides, and your body registers the difference between where you sit now and the lower entry tunnel you crawled through earlier. The air here is distinctly warmer, not tropical, but noticeably gentler on your cheeks and fingertips. The reason, though subtle, is brilliant in its simplicity. The sleeping platform is raised above the ground. One accepted detail from survival manuals points out that warm air naturally rises, while colder currents pool at the bottom of enclosed spaces. Medieval Europeans understood this principle intuitively. In their stone keeps, lords often slept in upper chambers where warmth collected, leaving the drafty lower floors to servants. In the Arctic, builders mirrored the same instinct, but without stone or wood. Instead, they shaped the igloo floor so that the central area dipped slightly, while the sleeping ledges curved upward. Lying on that ledge, you escape the heaviest chill and bask in the faint heat accumulating near the ceiling. A curious side note, some families even sculpted multiple tiers into larger domes, a ledge for parents, another for children, sometimes an extra layer for guests or for storing supplies. To the outside eye, it might look like nothing but a snow hut, but inside it became a multi-level home, organized by height and purpose. You imagine clambering up one of those tiers, each step carrying you into slightly warmer air, like climbing invisible ladders of heat. The academic conversation hasn't closed around exactly how elaborate these interior designs were during the medieval centuries. Some anthropologists argue that most igloos were Spartan: one bench, one lamp, nothing more, while others point to oral traditions describing intricate layouts with shelves, niches, and even small partitions. The disagreement reveals more than architecture. It shows how little the outside world truly understood about these frozen households, leaving modern minds to reconstruct possibilities from fragments and stories. You run your hand along the surface of the bench you're lying on now. It feels surprisingly smooth, carved deliberately flat with the builder's knife. A layer of hides and furs softens the hardness, but beneath them you sense the sculpted snow, solid and intentional. The bench is not just practical. It represents careful thought about how to shape comfort from unyielding material. You picture the family who built this space, taking pride in the perfect curve of the ledge, knowing their children would sleep warmer because of it. Lying here, you realize the height gives you another advantage. The air feels less damp. Cold pockets near the floor often hold more moisture, tiny icy drafts that make your bones ache. But up here, the air moves differently, less biting, more forgiving. It's a tiny difference. Yet when nights are endless and temperatures lethal, such details decide whether you wake with stiff joints or with the strength to hunt again. Your thoughts wander to the medieval huts of Europe once more. Picture peasants huddling on raised straw pallets above the dirt, trying to stay out of the damp ground chill. The logic is universal. When survival is at stake, humans everywhere discover the same truths, shaped by the physics of air. But in the Arctic, with no timber to lift you above the soil, snow itself became carpenter and mason, shaping a raised bed out of nothing but frozen water. Something slightly whimsical drifts into your imagination. Perhaps children turned those platforms into playgrounds, leaping down from one tier to the floor, their laughter echoing through the dome, the walls amplifying the sound. Maybe parents scolded them gently, worried about cracking blocks, yet smiled all the same. Even here, surrounded by peril, life carried on with moments of play and joy. Archaeologists remain uncertain how much personal identity showed in these spaces. Did one family decorate their ledge differently than another? Were carved shelves common, or rare luxuries? Were raised tiers strictly practical, or did they also carry a sense of status, elders on the highest level, children below? These questions ripple through academic debates, unresolved, tantalizing. You find yourself half amused, half curious, realizing that scholars still try to peer through melted walls centuries later. Your own body sinks deeper into the warmth of the furs. Beneath you, the snow bench does not melt because the hides insulate it, keeping the fragile balance between solid form and human heat. Above you, the dome arches high, trapping the warmth that rises from your breath and body. And slowly, as you lie there, the logic of the design seeps not just into your mind but into your muscles. You feel the calm assurance of sleeping in a space built for survival, where every curve, every ledge, every choice is a step toward life. The thought lulls you further. The snow is not just snow, it is memory, craft, and quiet wisdom. It shapes itself into a bench that lifts you above the cold floor, a stage where your body can finally rest. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you recognize how extraordinary it is that something so simple, a raised platform carved from snow, could transform unbearable winter into a place of sleep. The hides around you shift as you pull them tighter, and your nose fills with a musky, earthy smell, something wild, something animal. It is not unpleasant. In fact, it speaks of survival. These hides and furs are more than blankets. They are the final barrier between your fragile body and the Arctic's frozen grip. You run your hand across the thick hair of a caribou pelt, coarse at first, but softening where the underlayer is dense and springy. One common detail repeated in early ethnographic journals is that caribou hides were favored above most others. Why? Because their fur, with its hollow hairs, trapped more air than ordinary pelts, creating insulation that was almost unmatched. You notice this as you shift again. The caribou hide feels light, yet it traps warmth in seconds. Lay enough of them together, and the platform beneath you transforms into a cocoon. Here's an odd little glimpse into the texture of life. Muskox hides were also treasured, but they carried a pungent odor when fresh, one that clung stubbornly to the nose. Families sometimes joked that sleeping under a muskox was like sharing a bed with the beast itself. Yet, in the bitterest nights, no one complained. Smell was a small price to pay for warmth that could save a life. You imagine wrinkling your nose as the scent lingers, but then sighing gratefully as the heat builds around your chest. There's lingering disagreement among researchers about how bedding was layered in medieval centuries. Some argue that families stacked hides directly on snow, while others suggest brush or moss might have been laid beneath to prevent dampness from seeping upward. Evidence is scarce, since plant material rarely survives Arctic conditions. The truth remains veiled, leaving you to picture either soft nests of caribou hair or simple piles of skin thrown down in urgency. You tug one hide over your shoulders and feel the tiny sharp edges of stitched sinew. These weren't just raw skins. They were sewn together with bone needles and thread, made from animal tendons, tough yet flexible. You can almost hear the quiet rhythm of sewing, a mother or grandmother humming softly as her hands work in firelight, each stitch a promise of warmth for her family. Such moments are lost to written history, but you can feel them living on in every seam pressed against your fingertips. The hides aren't only practical, they carry memory. Each pelt speaks of a hunt days of tracking, the sharp cry of victory, the butchering, the careful preservation of every usable piece. You are sleeping inside a history of labor and respect. No part of the animal is wasted, and each hide becomes both protection and story. You roll over, and it's as if you can hear echoes of the hunt in the rustle of fur. Compared to medieval Europe's rough wool blankets, these hides are heavier, richer, closer to the bone. European peasants, shivering on straw pallets, relied on woven cloth and perhaps a sheepskin. Kings themselves, in their castles, layered furs brought from trade, though not always with the insulating efficiency of Arctic hunters. Here, necessity stripped away luxury and replaced it with precision. If you did not have hides, you did not have sleep. A curious aside, elders sometimes claimed that children slept more soundly when bundled under reindeer skins than under any other. The hollow hairs supposedly lulled the body into warmth more quickly, making infants less fussy through the night. Whether this is folklore or physiology, you cannot tell. But you can almost picture a swaddled child snoring gently, tiny breath clouds fogging the dim air, parents resting easier beside them. Archaeologists continue to puzzle over how families balanced bedding with limited resources. Did they prioritize elders with the thickest hides? Did hunters claim the warmest furs to stay strong for the chase? Or did families share everything equally, piling on whatever was available? The debate carries undertones of social order, of how survival reorganized family hierarchies under the pressure of cold. You stretch out, letting your fingers trail across different textures, the sleek shine of seal skin, almost slippery under your palm, the deep shag of wolf fur, coarse but protective, the dense cushion of caribou, springy and full of trapped air. Each has its own rhythm, its own way of cradling your tired body. Together, they form a patchwork quilt of the Arctic wilderness, stitched into the heart of the igloo. Your eyelids grow heavier as you sink further into this bedding. You feel the hides press against you, warm from your own breath, smelling faintly of the animals that once roamed the tundra. There is something strangely intimate about this, the closeness of human life and animal sacrifice, the intertwining of existence. You are not separate from nature here. You are wrapped in it, carried by it, preserved by it. And as you drift closer to sleep, you realize that in this fragile dome, in this fragile bed, the line between survival and extinction lies in the hollow hairs of a caribou, in the musky weight of a musk ox, in the stitched thread of a sinew, fragility and resilience entwined, cradling you through one more brutal winter night. A shuffle at your feet breaks the stillness, followed by a warm, damp breath against your leg. You glance down and see a pair of eyes glimmering in the dim lamp glow. The sled dogs, faithful companions and workers alike, curl themselves in tight circles near the sleeping bench, their bodies radiating heat as steadily as small stoves. The igloo was never meant for humans alone, it was a shared chamber of survival. We know from reliable accounts of early Arctic travelers that families often invited their strongest dogs indoors during the most punishing storms. Not for sentimentality alone, though affection was surely part of it, but because the dogs were precious. They pulled sleds, carried supplies, and guarded the camp. Losing them to frostbite or exhaustion could mean losing the family's own mobility and safety. So the dogs came inside, their paws thawing, their fur steaming faintly in the warm air, their hearts beating in rhythm with their human companions. Here's a curious detail that lingers in oral tradition. Some hunters believed the smell of dogs, mixed with human scent inside an igloo, acted as a deterrent to prowling animals outside, like polar bears or Arctic foxes. The layered odor suggested a larger pack within, discouraging predators from venturing close. You wrinkle your nose at the thought the musk of wet fur, mixed with seal oil, smoke, and the tang of hides. But survival often comes with its own fragrance, one that marks the difference between life and death. There's still disagreement among researchers about how many animals typically shared the igloo space. Some argue only a handful of the most essential dogs were brought in, while others suggest whole teams crowded the interior during brutal blizzards. The lack of physical evidence leaves the matter open, and so you are left to imagine. Perhaps 3 or 4 curled by the entry tunnel, another at your feet, another pressed near the lamp, each a breathing engine of warmth. The dog beside you sighs, long and low, curling tighter. You reach down, your hand brushing its fur, and feel the thick undercoat that traps warmth in a way even the best human furs cannot. Its body heat seeps into your palm, reminding you that warmth is communal here. Humans alone might endure, but humans with dogs and hides and lamps together, that is what creates resilience. The soundscape shifts. One dog twitches in a dream, its paw scratching the air. Another lets out a muffled bark, quickly settling back into rhythmic breathing. These noises, small and unremarkable, fill the silence like lullabies. Outside, the storm may rage, but inside the dome, companionship creates harmony. You listen, lulled not only by the presence of people, but by the symphony of canine slumber. In medieval Europe, dogs often guarded doors and slept near hearths, but their role was different, more boundary than partner. Here, in the Arctic, the line between human and animal blurred into partnership. The dogs ate from the same food supplies, worked alongside their owners, and at night shared their body heat in the same shelter. They were not merely pets, they were colleagues in survival. Something a little whimsical enters your thoughts. Imagine a child, nestled between parents, drifting towards sleep with one hand buried in a dog's fur, fingers tangled in warmth. The child feels safer, less afraid of the wind outside, because the dog is there, steady, strong, and loyal. Such scenes never made it into explorers' journals, but you can sense them anyway, hidden in the quiet intimacy of shared survival. Anthropologists continue to question the full extent of the bond between dogs and Arctic peoples during the medieval period. Did the animals sleep indoors every night, or only in extremity? Were they fed special rations for warmth, or left to scavenge scraps? The debates swirl endlessly, because the written record is sparse, but the oral histories and the still-practiced traditions suggest the answer is both. It depended on the storm, the hunt, the season. Flexibility, not rules, defined survival. The dog at your feet shifts again, pressing closer. Its breath fogs in the cold air, and you feel the heat linger on your ankle. You close your eyes, and in that moment, the presence of the animal feels as comforting as the hides and the lamp. Humans alone would shiver and wake often, but with animals pressed against them, they could sink deeper into sleep, hearts steadier, muscles relaxed. You drift with that thought, recognizing that survival is rarely solitary. It is built on webs of connection between people, between animals, between the elements themselves. The igloo is proof of that truth. Snow walls, human bodies, dog warmth, lamp fire, all separate pieces, meaningless alone, but together a miracle of endurance. And as you settle further into the bedding, lulled by the gentle chorus of canine breaths, you realize you are not just inside a shelter. You are inside a community, woven from fur, flesh, breath, and trust. That, more than anything else, is what makes the night survivable. The lamp sputters once more, and a faint puff of smoke curls upward toward the dome. Your eyes follow it, mesmerized by how the dark tendril twists and spreads before thinning into the pale blue of the snow ceiling. The air smells dense with oil, sharp and fatty, leaving a film on your tongue. It is not the scent of wood smoke you might know from fireplaces or campfires elsewhere. This is the smell of seal oil, the essence of survival carved from the body of an animal that gave its life not only for food, but also for heat and light. A well-recorded observation from Arctic journals notes that these stone lamps, called quillik by the Inuit, were the heart of the home. They were more than just flickering flames. They dried clothing, warmed food, and kept frost from building too thick on the walls. Without them, nights in the igloo would have been colder, damper, and lonelier. You feel that truth in the heat brushing your cheek now, a fragile circle of warmth in a hostile world. A curious note surfaces in your imagination. Some lamps were filled not only with oil but with a wick made from dried moss or Arctic cotton, gathered painstakingly from summer marshes. The sight of a glowing lamp, fueled by plant and animal alike, tied the family to two seasons at once, summer's brief greenery and winter's long hunger. You can almost smell the faint, earthy tang hiding beneath the heavy animal scent, though perhaps that is only your mind conjuring what once was. There's continuing debate among scholars about the side effects of this nightly smoke. Did families suffer long-term lung damage from inhaling the fumes? Some medical historians suggest yes, noting that soot deposits have been found on ancient lamp bowls. Others argue that careful tending and small ventilation holes kept air circulation steady enough to prevent danger. You sit inside the dome now, inhaling the thick air, and wonder which is closer to truth. The walls seem to breathe with you, taking in smoke, exhaling calm. Your ears pick up the faint crackle of the wick as it eats the oil. The sound is subtle but comforting, like the ticking of a clock. In this frozen wilderness, that crackle marks time as reliably as church bells once did in medieval towns far to the south. Each hiss is a reminder that life continues, minute by minute, so long as the flame holds. The ceiling bears its scars. You see streaks of soot, black veins staining the pristine whiteness of snow. They arch above you like ancient cave drawings, a record of every night the lamp burned. Imagine a scholar centuries from now crawling into such a collapsed igloo, chipping through frozen layers, finding these faint black traces, and wondering how many stories they held. The igloo itself becomes both shelter and canvas, marked by fire in the heart of snow. The warmth makes you drowsy. You feel sweat pricks slightly under your arms, surprising after hours of shivering outside. But with the warmth comes a delicate danger. Too much heat, and the ceiling might drip steadily, pooling water on the hides. Too little, and frost reclaims its grip, chilling every breath. The lamp has to be tended constantly, trimmed and fed, like a baby needing attention. One neglected wick, one lamp left to sputter out, and the cocoon of survival could shatter. Your mind drifts outward again, comparing. In medieval Europe, hearths filled great halls with roaring flames, smoke pouring through rafters, sometimes choking entire rooms. Fires were both luxury and hazard, burning whole wooden villages to ash. Here, by contrast, the flame is small, precise, enclosed. It does not dominate the room but coexists with it. It teaches humility. You don't need grandeur to live, only enough light to see faces and enough warmth to keep skin from cracking. A whimsical image forms. Perhaps children stared at the lamp flame as though it were a storyteller itself, its flickers casting shadows that resembled spirits on the wall. Maybe parents warned them to be quiet, to let the lamp speak with its crackle. The lamp was more than tool. It was the companion of every night, flickering at the center of life. Archaeologists remain uncertain about how long lamps typically burned before being refilled. Some evidence suggests several hours at a time. Others argue the tending was near constant. They puzzle over the quantities of oil harvested each season, calculating how many seals had to be hunted just to keep families through the winter. These debates are not trivial. They remind you that light itself was a resource as precious as bread or meat elsewhere in the world. You shift closer to the glow. It washes your face in amber, softening the sharp lines of shadow. Around you, the others breathe steadily. The dogs twitch in their dreams, and above, the snow glows faintly blue against streaks of soot. You are inside a paradox, a fire burning in the belly of frozen water, the two most opposite elements entwined. And in that paradox lies the secret of survival. You let your eyes close, lulled by the faint hiss, the musky scent, the warmth on your cheek. The lamp breathes with you, steady, fragile, eternal in its own way. And as your mind drifts, you understand why people called it the heart of the home. It was not only a flame in the night, it was proof that even here, in the coldest corners of the medieval world, humans could carve light from darkness and warmth from the bones of winter. You shift again beneath the furs, aware of the closeness of bodies pressed around you. It is not a palace, not a hall with wide space, but a narrow cocoon where elbows and shoulders touch whether you want them to or not. Yet here, pressed together, you find a rhythm of survival. Body heat mingles, breaths overlap, warmth pools in layers, stronger with each person. Alone you would shiver, together you can sleep. One well-attested fact from later accounts is that explorers who tried to mimic igloo life without sharing body warmth often failed miserably. They clung to European ideas of privacy, each demanding his own bed, and in doing so they froze. The locals, by contrast, knew intimacy was not luxury but necessity. Sleep came only when bodies curled against one another, when warmth moved from skin to skin, fur to fur. Here's an unusual detail worth smiling at. Families often joked that you could measure love by how tightly someone pressed against you on a winter's night. A husband who rolled away was teased in the morning for lacking affection, or perhaps for lacking common sense. The laughter hid a serious truth. If you weren't willing to share your heat, you weren't willing to keep your family alive. Experts continue to disagree on how this closeness was negotiated in larger igloos. Did entire extended families sleep in sprawling piles? Or did smaller nuclear families keep to themselves, building multiple domes instead of one? Archaeological evidence leaves the question unanswered, and oral stories contradict one another. The uncertainty itself reminds you how flexible survival strategies had to be changing with snow, season, and circumstance. You feel a stranger's shoulder, at least in your imagination, pressing against yours. Steady, firm. The air between bodies is warmer, easier to breathe. You hear the soft rustle of hair against hide, the quiet sigh of someone turning in sleep. Even the dogs, curled at your feet, share the warmth, their fur brushing your ankles. You are not simply resting beside others. You are part of a living, breathing furnace made of community. Compare this to medieval Europe, where peasants often slept packed into beds, not because they fully understood thermal dynamics, but because houses were drafty and fuel scarce. Brothers and sisters piled together. Grandparents slept at the foot of the bed. Children pressed between parents. What peasants did out of poverty, Arctic families did out of wisdom. The practice converged from different needs, yet in both, survival outweighed modesty. A whimsical thought drifts across your mind. Perhaps children whispered secrets in the dark, hidden by the cloak of warmth, giggling while parents tried to hush them. Or perhaps two young lovers lay awake, pretending to sleep while sharing the comfort of closeness. In this frozen world, intimacy blossomed in the most ordinary of gestures. An elbow against your ribs, a hand resting against your arm, a breath warming your cheek. Anthropologists remain fascinated by how such proximity shaped culture. Did constant closeness create deeper bonds of trust? Or did it spark quiet tensions that had to be smoothed over by stories, jokes, and rituals? The answers are speculative, but what you know for certain, lying here in the imagined dome, is that closeness felt not optional but elemental. The lamp glows faintly, smoke tracing lines above, while the shared warmth grows thick around you. It is not the roaring heat of a fire, nor the dry warmth of stoves, but a moist, living warmth, carried by lungs and hearts. You draw a deeper breath, and notice how it lingers, heavier than the icy air outside. And as you exhale, your own warmth adds to the pool, joining the invisible weave that holds everyone safe until morning. Sleep draws closer now. Your body softens, muscles unwinding under the weight of furs and the cushion of hides. Yet more than the bedding or the lamp, it is the nearness of others that soothes you. You feel your pulse slow to match theirs, a strange communal rhythm. The igloo is no longer just a structure. It is a shared body, breathing, sighing, alive. And you understand, perhaps more deeply than before, that survival in brutal winters did not come from strength alone. It came from surrender, from leaning against others, allowing warmth to flow freely, trusting the press of shoulders in the night. The night stretches on, and you are half asleep when a sudden sound jolts you awake. It is faint at first, like the creak of a floorboard in a quiet house. But here there are no wooden planks, only snow. You hold your breath and listen. There it is again, a soft cracking, a low groan from the walls themselves. The igloo is alive, adjusting to the cold. One well-documented observation by later polar explorers was that igloos are not perfectly silent structures. They move and settle, expanding and contracting as temperatures shift. The snow blocks contract in bitter cold, sometimes popping faintly as tiny fractures form, while in slightly warmer spells, the interior surface may melt and refreeze, sealing itself stronger. You realize you are sleeping inside something dynamic, a shell that changes with every breath of weather. Here's a peculiar tidbit that makes you smile nervously. Some hunters swore they could predict incoming storms by listening to how their igloo creaked at night. A sudden series of pops and groans, they said, meant the wind was shifting and pressure would soon fall. To outsiders, this might sound like superstition, but when your life depends on reading the language of snow, even tiny sounds become prophecy. The academic conversation hasn't closed around how reliable such auditory cues were. Some researchers argue it was coincidence, that people simply read meaning into random noises. Others believe long experience sharpened the ear, allowing families to sense changes through sound that no written barometer could capture. You lie there, listening to the dome whisper, and wonder which side is closer to the truth. The cracking isn't dangerous, not tonight. It is more like joints stretching after a long day. The dome breathes with you, flexing just enough to remind you that it is both fragile and resilient. You imagine a child waking at the sound, clutching closer to a parent, soothed by a whispered assurance that the igloo was only speaking, not breaking. Perhaps those reassurances became lullabies in themselves, the language of comfort against the language of snow. Your own body adjusts. At first you were tense, fearing collapse, picturing tons of snow cascading over you. But as minutes pass, you accept the rhythm. Crack, creak, silence, crack. The noises blend into the tapestry of the night, no more alarming than the snore of a sleeping companion or the twitch of a dog's paw. You find yourself lulled instead of frightened. In medieval Europe, homes groaned for different reasons. Timbers settling, winds rattling shutters, smoke hissing in chimneys. Those sounds too could be ominous or comforting, depending on how well you knew them. In both worlds, safety meant learning the voice of your shelter, trusting it to complain but not collapse. A whimsical thought crosses your drowsy mind. Perhaps the igloo is like a great sleeping creature, shifting in its dreams. The cracks are its snores, the faint drips of melt its sighs. You live for a time inside its belly, carried through the night by its patient endurance. The idea is almost comforting, though you know rationally it's only snow and cold. Still, imagination keeps fear at bay. Archaeologists still debate how often igloos actually collapsed in use. Were they rare accidents, or common occurrences accepted as inevitable? Without written records, no one can say for sure. But oral stories hint at both tragedies: when domes failed under sudden thaws, and laughter when children leapt too wildly on roofs and sent the ceiling tumbling. The truth is likely somewhere between. Danger was real, but not constant. You turn on your side, pressing closer to the furs, and the cracking continues at intervals. But now it feels less like warning, more like reassurance. The dome is adjusting, responding, strengthening. Its voice becomes part of the night's chorus, joining the dog's snores, the lamp's hiss, the steady breaths of companions. Sleep tugs at you again. You allow the sound to wash over you, reminding yourself that every shelter speaks. Wooden rafters, stone arches, snow domes, each has its language. The trick is learning when to fear and when to trust. Tonight, you choose trust. The cracking fades into silence, and soon another sound drifts into your ears, softer, lighter, filled with laughter. You turn your head and see children huddled together near the raised ledge, their tiny hands flicking chords between their fingers. In the dim glow of the oil lamp, the strings shimmer like spider silk. They are playing cat's cradle, weaving figures of birds, fish, and hunters' bows, the strands catching firelight and snow glow alike. One reliable account collected in the 19th century notes that string games were more than amusement. They were teaching tools, passing on images of tools, animals, and spirits in a world where drawing and writing were rare luxuries. A child could learn how to imagine a seal or the arc of a bowstring long before handling the real thing, simply by pulling and twisting cords. You watch, fascinated, as a girl's small hands stretch the pattern wide, revealing a shape like a star, before she bursts into muffled giggles. Something slightly unusual drifts into your awareness. In some Arctic traditions, string games were believed to be dangerous during certain seasons. Elders warned that playing them when the sun never set in summer could anger the spirits or entangle hunters in bad luck. Whether superstition or symbolic teaching, these taboos gave weight to play, reminding children that even games were woven into cycles of nature. You wonder whether those warnings were whispered on long nights like this, or whether children sneaked games anyway when parents dozed. Researchers remain divided about just how widely these games were practiced in the medieval centuries. Some anthropologists argue they were nearly universal, while others insist they belonged only to particular clans or regions. The academic disagreement leaves the truth blurred, but the string still glides between the children's fingers tonight, glowing faintly in lamplight, as though time itself cannot sever it. You listen closely to the children's giggles. They are soft, muffled, respectful of the sleepers nearby. Yet they cut through the heaviness of the igloo with a freshness that feels like spring air sneaking into winter. Every laugh, every playful whisper reminds you that even here, where hunger and cold press constantly, joy has a place. Children do not wait for ideal circumstances. They invent games with whatever is at hand: fur scraps, string, carved bones, or simply snow. You remember that in medieval Europe too, children played even in poverty. Pebbles became toys, sticks became swords, straw dolls cradled in soot-dark cottages. In both worlds, play offered escape from hardship, training for the future, and bonds of community. Laughter, you realize, is as essential as fire. A whimsical thought crosses your mind. Perhaps these children, wrapped in hides, string looping across their fingers, dreamed of stories just as complex as those told by adults. Each pattern of string could represent not only tools and animals but entire adventures: the hunt for a caribou, the chase of a fox, the leap of a salmon. A child's imagination, amplified by lamplight, might have built whole worlds inside a dome of snow. Archaeologists and historians puzzle over the significance of such play. Was it pure leisure, or was it symbolic teaching, weaving knowledge into hands that would soon wield spears and sew hides? They may never know for certain, but lying here, watching the string figures flash in firelight, you feel the answer must be both. Games were never just games. They were practice for survival, disguised as joy. The laughter ebbs, and one child yawns, dropping the cord into a tangled heap. A mother reaches out, smoothing her child's hair, whispering something too soft to hear. The children settle under hides, their giggles replaced by sighs of sleep. But the warmth they've left behind lingers in the air. Not physical heat, but emotional. The dome feels brighter somehow, as if their laughter has carved light into the snow itself. You roll onto your back and close your eyes. The memory of string games lingers on your lids, glowing shapes dancing like auroras. You realize the igloo is more than a shelter of snow. It is a theater, a classroom, a cradle of imagination. And as the children slip into dreams, you too are carried into slumber, soothed by the knowledge that play and laughter endure even in the harshest winters. Your eyelids grow heavy, but the night refuses to stay silent. A new chorus rises, not from inside the dome, but from the world beyond. The wind begins to gather itself, moaning across the snowfields like a restless choir. The sound filters through the walls in muted tones, turning sharp shrieks into low, ghostly hums. You lie still, listening. The igloo muffles the violence, but the storm makes itself known, weaving into your half-dreams. One credible detail from early explorers' journals is that wind outside an igloo could howl, so fiercely it drowned out conversation if you dared step beyond the door. Yet inside, the sound shifted, softened, transformed into music. Families described it as the singing of the night. You recognize that melody now, long notes, rising and falling, as though the world itself were breathing. Here's an odd image that floats through stories. Some people claim the wind carried voices of animals or ancestors, teaching lessons through its howls. A child who misbehaved was told to listen more carefully, for perhaps the wind was scolding them. In this way, the Arctic itself became a storyteller, its voice shaping the dreams of those who slept in snow houses. You imagine a boy or girl pressing close to a parent, whispering, "Did you hear the bear speak?" while the parent chuckled softly, grateful for a moment of wonder amid survival. Scholarly circles remain divided about how these beliefs shaped daily life. Were the howling winds treated mainly as practical warnings of weather shifts, or did they carry spiritual significance? Anthropologists argue both sides, tracing oral tales that blur the line between meteorology and mythology. You lie beneath the firs, feeling the sound seep through your skull, and wonder if perhaps both a true wind can be both science and spirit, fact and fable. Your own mind begins to twist the sound into visions. The hum becomes the low throb of a drum. The shrieks turn into high-pitched flutes. The whole storm becomes an orchestra playing for no audience but snow, ice, and stars. You feel it vibrating in your bones, a lullaby and a warning at once. Each gust is another verse, another reminder that the Arctic is vast, powerful, and utterly indifferent to your presence. In medieval Europe, storms rattled wooden shutters, shook rafters, and wailed through stone towers. Monks in monasteries wrote of tempests as voices of God, punishments or calls to prayer. Farmers feared them as omens of ruined crops. Here, in the Arctic, the same elemental force became a constant winter companion. The difference was not the sound itself, but how people learned to live with it. You think of monks and hunters, thousands of miles apart, both lying awake, listening to the same restless wind through different walls. Something whimsical stirs in you. Perhaps a child, drifting between sleep and wakefulness, once imagined the storm as a giant animal circling the igloo, pawing at the snow, growling in frustration that it could not break in. And maybe, soothed by that thought, the child felt safer if the storm was a creature, then the igloo was a fortress strong enough to hold it at bay. Archaeologists continue to puzzle over how much weather sounds shaped folklore. Was the howling simply endured, or was it woven into stories passed down by firelight? No written record confirms it, only fragments of myth and memory hinting at how deeply the wind entered the imagination. The uncertainty leaves you free to dream your own version, letting the storm become what you need it to be. The dome trembles faintly with each blast, but the walls hold. The snow creaks, adjusts, and remains steady. You feel a wave of gratitude for the builders, for their skill that allows you to listen to the storm without being consumed by it. The igloo is not silent, it is an instrument, turning shrieks into whispers, danger into lullaby. Your breathing slows to match the rhythm of the wind's song. Each inhale rises with the gusts. Each exhale falls with their fading. You let yourself drift, half awake, half dreaming, carried on the music of the storm. The night outside may be merciless, but inside, wrapped in hides and warmth, you find peace in the strange harmony of snow and wind. You are not fully asleep when a different noise joins the storm's chorus, softer, sharper, deliberate, scraping. You lift your head slightly, heart beating faster. At first it could be snow shifting, but then comes another sound, a faint snuffle, the unmistakable rhythm of an animal's breath pressed close against the wall. Your skin prickles, something is outside. One reliable record from northern hunters describes nights when Arctic foxes prowled near the walls of igloos, pawing lightly at the packed snow in search of scraps. These creatures, small and wily, often scavenged where humans lived, trusting their noses more than their caution. You imagine the sleek body of a fox now, pacing outside your dome, sniffing at the faint smell of dried fish and seal oil clinging to your clothes. Here's an odd little story from oral tradition. Some people believed foxes were tricksters, spirits in disguise, testing whether families kept their shelters clean. A well-fed fox outside meant you had been careless, leaving scraps to lure it. A hungry fox circling, however, was a warning of harsher times ahead. You picture its shadow darting across the moonlit snow, and the thought unsettles you. What message is it bringing tonight? The academic debate persists over larger threats. Could polar bears truly be deterred by small igloos? Some researchers argue the structure offered real protection. Bears, massive as they were, often ignored the strange mounds. Others claim the safety was partial at best, noting accounts of collapsed domes where paw prints lingered outside. The scholarly disagreement underscores the fear. When you hear a heavy snuffle in the night, you never know whether it belongs to a fox or a beast large enough to shatter your world. You lie still, ears straining. The sound outside grows heavier, slower. Snow crunches under weight. The dogs stir, one growling low in its throat, another whining faintly. The lamp flickers, and the silence inside grows taut. For a moment you picture claws tearing through the wall, a massive paw sweeping hides and bodies into chaos. But then the sound shifts again, lighter, quicker. Not a bear, likely a fox after all, or perhaps a curious wolf nosing around. The tension eases, though your heart still hammers. In medieval Europe, night visitors were thieves, raiders, sometimes even spirits imagined in folklore. Doors and shutters stood between families and danger. Here, in the Arctic, the boundary was thinner, just a curve of snow separating you from the wild. Yet the principle remained the same. Fear sharpened senses, stories explained noises, and vigilance never fully slept. Something whimsical crosses your mind, easing the fear. Perhaps children once whispered that if a fox circled your igloo 3 times, it was bringing good luck, guiding hunters to prey the next day. Perhaps the scratching was not menace but promise. You smile faintly in the dark, soothed by the idea that even dangers could be recast as blessings when survival demanded hope. Archaeologists and storytellers remain uncertain how common such animal encounters truly were. Did most families pass nights in peace, or was every sleep haunted by scrapes and snuffles? Without direct records, you cannot know. Yet the presence of dogs inside suggests the fear was real enough. Animals were companions, yes, but also sentinels, their ears sharper than yours, their growls louder warnings than any human whisper. The sound outside drifts away at last, fading into the storm's song. The dogs settle, curling back into warmth, though one keeps its head raised a little longer, eyes glowing in the dim lamplight. You exhale slowly, realizing you had been holding your breath. The dome remains intact. No paw has broken through. No claws have slashed the wall. Safety, for now. You pull the hides tighter around your chest. The encounter leaves you restless but also oddly comforted. The igloo held. Its walls did not yield. And though the night is alive with prowlers, inside you remain untouched. Sleep may be fragile, but the shelter endures, a small miracle against the wild. The scrape of paws fades, the dogs sigh back into slumber, and calm returns. Yet your mind does not quiet so easily. You stare into the dim glow of the lamp, your thoughts drifting toward the invisible layers of protection that go beyond snow and fur. For many who slept in igloos, warmth was not only physical, it was spiritual. You imagine small charms tucked into bedding, herbs burned for scent, whispered words pressed into the air before sleep took hold. One consistent observation from ethnographers is that Arctic peoples often intertwined the practical and the mystical. A carved amulet of bone or ivory might rest above the sleeping bench, meant to keep away restless spirits. Talismans shaped like seals or birds reminded sleepers that the animal world watched over them, a silent pact between hunter and hunted. You picture a child clutching a tiny carved bear, its surface smoothed by years of fingers, its presence as reassuring as a parent's hand. Here's a curious note that drifts into your mind. Certain herbs, scarce in the Arctic, were carried long distances precisely because of their protective scent. Dried angelica, for example, was sometimes burned, releasing a sharp aroma believed to chase away illness. Imagine that fragrance weaving through the heavy musk of hides and oil smoke, a brief freshness mingling with survival's odor. It must have felt like a blessing from summer itself, bottled for winter. Specialists still debate how literally these practices were taken in the medieval centuries. Were charms seen as true barriers against harm, or simply as symbolic comforts to soothe anxious minds? Some scholars argue that belief itself created strength, while others view it as ritual layered onto practical habits. The disagreement lingers, reminding you that faith and survival often intertwine in ways outsiders struggle to measure. You shift under the hides, imagining the feeling of a bone charm pressing lightly against your chest as you drift to sleep. The lamp flickers, shadows dancing across the dome, and you almost expect those shadows to form figures, spirits of ancestors, hunters long gone, watching silently over the slumbering family. The walls of snow become not only shelter but temple, consecrated by faith as much as by labor. Compare this to medieval Europe, where villagers crossed themselves before bed, hung herbs above doors, and whispered prayers against witches and demons. In both frozen igloos and smoky cottages, night carried uncertainty. Sleep was a surrender, and humans sought protection not only in walls and locks but in rituals, charms, and whispered hopes. The universality is striking. Fear of the unseen has no borders. A whimsical thought surfaces. Perhaps children, drifting to sleep under the gaze of these charms, believed the amulets themselves dreamed on their behalf. A carved fish might swim through their dreams, a carved bird might carry them safely through storm skies. Even if fear woke them, the charm was there, glowing faintly in lamplight, proof that they were never entirely alone. Archaeologists continue to puzzle over the significance of such objects. Some amulets, carved from ivory, are found buried with adults, suggesting they were treasured beyond life itself. Others, worn smooth and small, hint at daily use, carried constantly as silent companions. What was superstition? What was faith? And what was simply habit? The question remains unsolved, leaving you to weave your own meanings into the shadows of the igloo. The dogs stir again, but only to curl tighter, tails over noses. A child sighs, pressing deeper into furs. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you picture a tiny carved figure lying beside you, its blank eyes reflecting firelight. You feel safer, though you know it's only imagination. Yet in that act, you grasp the truth. Survival is not only a battle against cold and hunger, it is also a battle against fear. And sometimes the smallest objects, a bone charm, a sprig of dried herb, win that battle better than walls of snow. The lamp crackles softly, smoke curling upward. You breathe deeply, scent mingling with memory, spirit mingling with shelter. And as you sink back into warmth, you understand that even in brutal winters, people found ways to stitch meaning into the night, to reassure themselves that beyond the cold, something benevolent watched. The smoky air thickens as the lamp burns lower, and your stomach stirs with its own reminder of hunger. Sleep inside the igloo is never free of food's presence, for even when bellies are empty, the smells linger. You close your eyes and imagine the savory steam of boiled seal meat rising from a pot, the rich, fatty aroma hanging in the dome long after the meal is gone. Hunger makes memory sharper, turning scents into dreams. One reliable description from later Arctic visitors tells how igloos often carried the lingering perfume of past meals. Without chimneys, the smoke and steam clung to snow walls, staining them with fragrance as surely as soot. When families woke at night, they breathed not only lamp smoke, but also the ghost of dinners, seal, fish, caribou, sometimes berries thawed from summer stores. You inhale, and in your imagination the flavors brush your tongue as vividly as if the food were before you. Here's an unusual little glimpse into daily life. Dried fish, often stiff as boards, was sometimes tucked into bedding to soften overnight from body warmth. By morning, it became chewable, though still tough, a small breakfast pulled straight from under the hides. The thought makes you chuckle softly, your pillow doubling as pantry, your bed both cradle and cupboard. The debate among researchers continues about how abundant food really was in medieval centuries. Some accounts suggest long stretches of scarcity, where people survived on scraps and broth. Others argue that seasonal abundance, seals in winter, fish in summer, kept larders relatively steady, with igloos acting as temporary resting stops during plentiful hunts. Archaeologists find bones and tools, but not enough to settle the question fully. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between nights of plenty followed by weeks of gnawing want. Your body shifts under the hides, and you imagine the taste of meat simmered in the same oil that fuels the lamp. The smell would cling to the dome, sweet and greasy, filling the air with both comfort and ache. Hunger might twist it cruelly, turning memories into torment, while full bellies turned it into lullaby. Food was never just sustenance here. It was mood, dream, and the thin line between hope and despair. You recall how in medieval Europe, families also fell asleep with the scent of meals clinging to rafters. Smoke-dark kitchens smelled of bread, onions, and stew, and even peasants' huts carried the memory of food into the night. Across continents, people everywhere drifted to sleep with hunger or satisfaction, written not only in their bellies but in the air around them. A whimsical image makes you smile. Perhaps a child dreamed of roasted goose or fat salmon simply because the smell of boiled seal still hung in the dome. Dreams flavored by dinner, sweet illusions for empty stomachs. Or maybe, for the lucky ones, the scent of stew made the night warmer, the dreams brighter, the sleep deeper. Anthropologists remain uncertain how much food was stored directly inside igloos. Some suggest only the bare minimum, with larger caches buried outdoors in snow pits. Others argue that smaller igloos doubled as kitchens, the warmth from lamps helping to thaw and cook. You cannot know the truth for certain, but lying here, surrounded by imagined aromas, you can easily picture families carving meat in lamplight, their laughter muffled, their breath clouding above steaming pots. The hunger in your own gut feels sharper now, yet strangely, it soothes you too. It ties you to the people you imagine, hunters, children, mothers, elders, all sharing the same ache, the same comfort, the same dreams scented with food. You are not alone in your hunger. You are part of a long chain of winter sleepers, dreaming of feasts they could not yet taste. You close your eyes again, inhaling the ghost of flavors that cling to the snow. Hunger presses at you, but so does warmth, and the balance between them becomes its own kind of lullaby. In this igloo, even emptiness has weight, shaping dreams as surely as the furs and lamps shape survival. The lamp sputters again, and your stomach, still restless, brings you to another question. What happens when nature calls in the middle of a frozen night? It is not the sort of detail polite stories dwell on, but inside an igloo, survival was practical first, delicate second. You shift uneasily at the thought, realizing that even bodily needs had to adapt to the brutality of Arctic nights. One solid piece of evidence from explorers' diaries describes the use of small snow pits carved near the entry tunnel. These shallow depressions served as makeshift privies, sealed afterward with fresh snow. The idea was simple: better to risk brief cold than foul the sleeping chamber. You imagine crawling down that low passage, shivering as icy air bit your skin, muttering curses at your body's inconvenient timing. Here's a curious little aside. Sometimes, in larger family camps, urine was collected and frozen into blocks, later used in tanning hides. Waste became resource, another example of how nothing in this harsh environment could be dismissed as useless. It is an image both strange and ingenious, turning discomfort into tool. Researchers still wrestle with the question of how medieval Arctic families truly managed such routines. Did every igloo have its own waste pit, or were shared communal areas dug outside? Some anthropologists believe families braved the cold together, making quick trips into the storm. Others argue that ingenuity led to indoor solutions, however unglamorous. The academic debate remains unsettled, a reminder that history does not always preserve the unspoken details of daily life. You picture the awkwardness of it now. The dome is silent, filled with steady breathing. Then someone stirs, crawls down the tunnel, and vanishes briefly into the night. Cold air slips back in with them, a faint shiver passing through the sleepers as they return, stamping snow from their boots, crawling back under hides. A small disturbance, but one everyone accepts. In the igloo, privacy is scarce, and modesty must bend to necessity. Think of medieval Europe again. Peasants used chamber pots, emptied in the morning into streets or fields. Lords had garderobes, stone shafts built into castle walls. Both reeked, both were essential. In the Arctic, snow itself became both wall and waste pit, absorbing what it needed to until dawn. Different materials, same problem, same human reality. A whimsical thought arises. You can almost hear a child giggling at the absurdity of parents crouching in the snow, whispering jokes to lighten the embarrassment. Humor softens survival's edge, even here. Perhaps that is why families endured. They laughed where others might despair. Archaeologists rarely speak of these matters, but when they do, they highlight the resilience hidden in such routines. To modern minds, it may seem grim, but for those who lived it, it was ordinary. Survival was not always grand, not always noble. It was messy, practical, and sometimes undignified. You shift again under your hides, the thought lingering. Even in the harshest winters, people found ways to balance necessity with dignity. The igloo was not just a structure of snow, but a stage where every aspect of life, from love to hunger to the most private acts, played out. It is strangely comforting to remember. Humanity endures not by avoiding discomfort, but by adapting to it. The lamp steadies, the dogs sigh, the dome hums with silence once more, and you, still amused by the thought of awkward night trips, feel your own breath relax. You are reminded that every detail, pleasant or otherwise, was part of the grand design of survival. And somehow, knowing that even the most inconvenient needs were managed, you feel closer to the families who once lived these nights, laughing, enduring, sleeping, and waking again. The lamp flickers lower, shadows stretching across the dome, and you begin to think about the balance between warmth and breath. The igloo is a miracle of insulation, but that miracle has its limits. Too much heat from the lamp, too many bodies pressed together, and the air grows heavy, thick with carbon and smoke. You shift uneasily, aware of the invisible line between comfort and suffocation. One well-accepted observation from polar expeditions is that builders always left a small hole or vent at the top of the igloo. A thumb-sized opening, barely noticeable, was enough to let smoke escape and fresh air enter. Without it, the fire's comfort could turn treacherous. You imagine looking up now, seeing that pinprick of darkness in the glowing snow ceiling, a tiny window to the stars you cannot quite see. Something slightly unexpected. Oral stories recall that some families would test the air by watching how the lamp flame bent. If it guttered too quickly, the air was stale, hungry for oxygen. A child might be told to crawl to the entrance and pull back a hide, letting a gasp of new air sweep in. You picture the rush of cold pouring down the tunnel. Shocking but life-giving. Scholars remain divided on whether medieval igloos often included true hearths for cooking, or whether lamps alone provided heat. Some argue that small, controlled fires were lit on stone slabs, while others insist that the risk of melting walls was too great. The academic debate endures, with little physical evidence to close it. You lie there, imagining both possibilities, a faint crackle of burning moss, or only the steady hiss of oil flames. You cough softly, feeling the smoke cling to your throat. The air is not dangerous yet, but you understand how fragile the balance must have been. Too much lamplight, too many voices, too little air, and sleep might slide into death without warning. Perhaps that is why families learn to wake often, adjusting wicks, checking vents, trusting dogs to stir and remind them that life still flowed. Compare this to medieval Europe's great halls, where fire roared day and night, but smoke suffocated those beneath rafters. Peasants lived with lungs blackened by soot. Children coughed through winters thick with smoke. Here, in the igloo, the problem was the same, only smaller, subtler, cloaked in silence. In both worlds, warmth and air waged a constant battle, one that humans learned to negotiate without always understanding the science. A whimsical vision enters your mind. Perhaps a child, noticing the vent above, imagined it as a secret window to the sky. They might whisper wishes into it, believing the stars could hear them through the tiny opening. The vent, meant for survival, became a magic doorway, a link between cramped dome and infinite heavens. Anthropologists still argue about how often igloos failed in this balance. Did families suffocate often, or only rarely? The records are sparse, the stories inconsistent. Some explorers noted tragedies, while others marveled at how skillfully locals managed their air. The truth, as always, sits between certainty and silence. You close your eyes, breathing deeply, testing the air as though you too must decide whether to open the vent wider. Your breath lingers heavy in your chest, but not enough to alarm you. The lamp burns steadily, its smoke tracing the dome like calligraphy. The igloo hums with its paradox. Too warm and you choke, too cold and you freeze. Only balance keeps you alive. And that is the lesson the dome whispers now, that survival is not found in extremes but in fragile equilibrium. The snow walls must melt just enough to harden, but not collapse. The lamp must burn bright enough to warm, but not smother. The vent must open just enough to refresh, but not chill. Every breath, every flame, every choice balances on a knife edge of necessity. You exhale slowly, letting your body soften again. The lamp flickers, the air holds steady, and you drift closer to sleep, comforted by the realization that fragile balance, though precarious, can last the whole night. The air steadies, the lamp burns low, and your thoughts drift towards something less practical, more human. What it meant to love, to marry, to share tenderness inside a dome of snow. You imagine the soft murmur of voices after the children sleep, two people whispering beneath heavy hides, their words muffled, but their meaning clear. Even here, in the most brutal winters, intimacy found a place. One strong piece of evidence from ethnographic accounts is that marriage ceremonies in Arctic communities could be simple yet profound. A union might be marked by shared work, shared hunts, or the moving of a young partner into a family's igloo. The community recognized it not with grandeur but with survival itself, two people promising to keep each other warm, in the most literal sense. You picture a new couple curling against each other on a raised snow bench, the night alive with storm winds outside, but with quiet inside. Here's an odd little whisper of tradition. In some stories, a freshly married pair was expected to share one lamp, its flame a symbol of their unity. If the flame sputtered, elders teased them gently, warning that harmony required constant tending, just like the wick. You smile at the image, two young faces leaning over a small bowl of oil, adjusting flame as if adjusting their bond. Scholars continue to puzzle over how much privacy newly married couples actually had in igloos. Did they sleep in crowded family domes, or were new shelters built for them alone? Some argue that intimacy thrived in the closeness of community. Others that couples sought space for themselves, even in harsh conditions. The debate lingers, reflecting both the practicality and the tenderness woven into daily life. You shift under your own covers, and the thought of warmth shared with another becomes suddenly vivid, bodies pressed together, not just for survival but for comfort, for joy, for reassurance that life held more than hunger and cold. You feel the imagined weight of a hand across your chest, the warmth of another's breath on your cheek, and realize that survival is not merely physical, it is emotional too. In medieval Europe, marriages were also practical, rooted in alliances, land and labor. Yet in smoky huts and stone keeps alike, young couples whispered in the dark, just as surely as here. Whether in castles or igloos, love grew strongest when it was folded into daily survival. The similarity strikes you. Different worlds, same heartbeat. A whimsical image crosses your mind. Perhaps two lovers, curled together under hides, pressed their foreheads close and whispered promises not only of love, but of survival. I will keep you warm. It is a vow as sacred as any spoken in churches or courts. Maybe the aurora outside seemed to bless them, colors rippling like veils of light, unseen but felt. Archaeologists and historians have little to say about these quiet moments, because such things leave no artifacts, no bones, no soot. Yet that absence only makes them more powerful. You realize that the most important truths of human life, the warmth of love, the intimacy of marriage, are the least likely to survive in physical record. They survive instead in imagination, in echoes, in the universality of human need. The dogs shift again, one paw twitching against your leg, and you return to the dome around you. It is not silent, it is filled with warmth, with breath, with memory. You can almost hear the laughter of young couples, the gentle teasing of elders, the sighs of closeness that echoed in nights long gone. Those sounds, though unrecorded, were as real as the crack of snow walls or the hiss of oil flames. You close your eyes, breathing more slowly now, and the imagined intimacy lulls you. The igloo feels less like a cold shelter and more like a home, a place where survival and love were braided together so tightly they became indistinguishable. And as sleep tugs at you again, you understand. In brutal winters, marriage was not simply a social contract. It was the act of two people deciding, together, to survive the night. The hush inside the dome deepens, broken only by the lamp's low hiss and the rhythmic breathing of sleepers. Then another sound enters, softer but fuller, an elder's voice. You open your eyes slightly and see a figure sitting upright, wrapped in layers of fur, speaking quietly into the dim air. Children stir, not from fear but from eagerness. It is story time. The classroom and the hearth rolled into one. One detail passed down in explorers' records is that elders used nighttime to teach. Stories weren't only amusement. They carried knowledge of hunting, navigation, and survival. Without books or parchment, memory became the library, and the igloo itself the reading room. You hear the cadence now. Slow, deliberate, a voice that expects silence, each word floating against the snow walls as if carved into them. Something curious tickles your thoughts. Many stories were layered with riddles. A tale might describe a hunter chasing a seal across ice, but beneath the plot lay a puzzle: when to strike, when to wait, how to read the animal's breath. Children listened not just for entertainment, but for secret lessons hidden in narrative. You picture a boy frowning in concentration, then breaking into a grin when he solved the riddle long before the story's end. Experts remain uncertain about the precise form of these tales in the medieval centuries. Some argue they were long sagas, like those of the Norse, while others believe they were short, simple fables tuned for young ears. The debate persists, for oral traditions leave few permanent traces, but in this dome tonight, the voice carries like scripture, timeless in its teaching. You listen to the story unfolding. It speaks of a great seal spirit, generous when honored, vengeful when neglected. The elder's hands move, shaping the air, as if sculpting the animal before your eyes. The children are rapt, their eyes glowing in the lamp's light. You feel rapt too, carried into a world where animals are teachers, not just prey. Think of medieval Europe again. There, monks read aloud from illuminated texts. Peasants listened to travelling bards spinning fables by firelight. The purpose was the same: to bind community, to preserve memory, to teach virtue. Whether in stone halls or snow domes, stories stitched the night together, giving shape to fear and hope alike. A whimsical image forms. Perhaps a child, half asleep, dreamed of the seal spirit leaping through the air, its whiskers glittering like stars, its body glowing with the green of the aurora. Dreams and stories blurred into one another until the dome itself became a cradle of myth. Anthropologists still discuss whether such storytelling was purely functional lessons disguised as entertainment, or whether it carried deeper spiritual power. Did listeners truly believe the spirits were listening with them, hovering unseen in the dome? Or was the belief metaphorical, a way of embedding memory in children's hearts? The uncertainty remains, but you feel the truth might be both. The elder's voice lowers to a whisper, the children's eyelids droop, and silence folds itself back over the dome. You exhale slowly, warmed not only by furs and flame but by story. The igloo has become more than shelter again. It has turned into a school, a temple, a theatre. Its snow walls hold knowledge as firmly as they hold heat. And as you drift toward slumber, you realize that memory itself is the most important insulation of all. Without stories, survival is only momentary. With stories, survival becomes legacy. Tonight, wrapped in hides and myths alike, you are both student and dreamer, carried gently into the long Arctic night. Sleep does not claim you fully, because the elder's tale lingers in your mind, and soon another voice rises, this time younger, quicker, less measured. The children, still restless, begin to swap their own stories, fragments half learned from parents, half invented from dreams. The igloo, once quiet, fills again with whispers and giggles, and in the dim glow of the lamp, you sense a different kind of education unfolding, less practical, more mysterious. One reliable detail drawn from Arctic folklore is that nights were often filled with talk of spirits moving through the snow and sky. People believed the aurora borealis was not merely light but the dance of souls, sometimes benevolent, sometimes dangerous. You picture a child pointing upward, though the aurora cannot be seen from inside, and insisting that the green ribbons were spirits chasing each other across the heavens. Here's a curious little twist that survives in oral traditions. Children were warned never to whistle at the northern lights. If they did, the lights might swoop down and snatch them away. You almost laugh at the thought, imagining a mischievous boy pursing his lips, then ducking behind a hide when the sky shimmered brighter, terrified that he had angered the souls above. Such warnings kept playfulness in check, while teaching reverence for the mysterious sky. Scholarly circles remain divided over how literally these beliefs were taken in the medieval centuries. Some anthropologists argue that stories of spirits were deeply sacred, woven into rituals of hunting and burial. Others suggest they functioned more as morality tales, tools to encourage obedience in children. The lack of direct evidence keeps the debate alive, but as you listen to the children's hushed voices, you realize the distinction may not matter. Whether sacred or playful, the stories gave shape to the unknowable. You lie back, letting their chatter wash over you. A boy tells of a fox spirit that prowls the snow, its tail sparking light in the sky. A girl counters with a tale of a giant woman who lives in the sea, controlling the animals hunters pursue. Their voices weave a tapestry richer than the hides covering you, their imaginations as important as any tool. You feel the air itself vibrate with the energy of stories too large for the dome to contain. In medieval Europe, children too grew up with warnings of spirits, the willow, the wisp luring travellers to marshes, the fairies who might swap infants, the saints who punished the wicked. These tales, like those of the Arctic, blurred the line between caution and wonder. Across the world, children lay in bed, listening to the invisible, shaping their fears into creatures they could name. A whimsical image enters your thoughts. Perhaps one night, long ago, children dared each other to whistle at the aurora. The lights shimmered brighter, and they screamed with laughter, convinced the spirits were answering. Their parents shook their heads, half in exasperation, half in awe, reminded that even in hardship, joy had a place. Anthropologists continue to puzzle over the origins of these beliefs. Were they born from fear of the unknown sky, or from awe at its beauty? Did people invent spirits to explain what science now calls charged particles? Or did the lights truly feel alive in a way no explanation could erase? The debate endures, but as you lie beneath the snow, you understand why answers are elusive. The aurora is not something to be explained away, it is something to be felt. The children's voices fade one by one as drowsiness overtakes them. Soon the igloo returns to quiet, filled only with the soft breathing of sleepers. Yet the stories linger, echoing in the snow walls, imprinting themselves like shadows on your mind. You drift closer to slumber, reassured by the thought that even in brutal winters, people carried not only tools and hides, but also tales of spirits dancing above them. And as your eyes close, you almost see the aurora through the snow ceiling, rippling and alive, watching over you as tenderly as any parent. The dome grows quiet again. But the silence is not the stillness of permanence, it is the pause between movements. For families who lived in igloos, no shelter was meant to last forever. Each night was only a chapter in a longer rhythm of journeys. You lie back, half awake, and imagine the greater cycle. The building, the staying, the leaving, the return. The igloo is not home in the permanent sense. It is a pause, a heartbeat in a much larger story of movement. A well-known observation in Arctic studies is that people built igloos as temporary dwellings during hunting expeditions or migrations. Some might be occupied for a week, some only a night. They were not castles or villages in stone. They were way stations, dissolving back into snow once abandoned. You feel the truth of this now. The walls around you are solid, but you know they are temporary, destined to melt, vanish, and leave no trace but memory. Something slightly curious. In some regions, families marked their seasonal routes with subtle snow cairns or carved wooden posts, so that when they returned months later, they could rebuild igloos in the same favored spots. Imagine retracing steps across endless tundra, finding the ghost of an old home and raising it again from the very same drifts. A cycle of vanishing and return, as natural as the migrations of animals they hunted. Researchers still debate whether medieval igloos were predominantly hunting shelters for small groups or larger family homes for extended stays. Some argue they were chiefly for men on long journeys, while others suggest entire families lived inside for seasons at a time. The academic conversation remains unresolved, leaving you to imagine both a father and son huddling alone one night, or a whole family with dogs and children filling the dome. You picture the dawn of migration day. Families rise early, packing hides, tools, and meat into bundles. Dogs are harnessed, sleds loaded, the lamp carefully extinguished. The igloo, once filled with warmth and laughter, is left empty. Outside, the family pauses to look back, their footprints leading away from a dome that will soon collapse into itself. The snow will reclaim it, as if no one had ever lived there. In medieval Europe, permanence was prized. Stone churches, timber halls, castles built to last centuries. But in the Arctic, permanence was impossible, even foolish. The landscape itself demanded impermanence. Homes were meant to disappear, just as footprints vanish in snow. You realize this difference is not weakness, but wisdom. The wisdom to build with the rhythm of nature, not against it. A whimsical vision enters your thoughts. Perhaps a child, reluctant to leave, carved a small symbol into the wall before departure. A star, a fish, a handprint. The igloo would soon melt, erasing the mark. But for that moment, the child felt they had left themselves behind, a message to the snow that they had been alive there. Anthropologists continue to puzzle over whether these migrations followed strict patterns or responded flexibly to weather and game. The evidence is patchy, but the oral stories suggest adaptability above all. People went where seals surfaced, where caribou ran, where fish returned. The igloo was not a destination, it was a tool for moving through cycles older than memory. You breathe deeply, aware that even your imagined night inside this dome is part of a journey. Sleep here is not rootedness but preparation, a pause before the next trek. The snow around you hums with impermanence, whispering that nothing stays, not even the walls that keep you warm now. And oddly, that truth soothes you. There is comfort in knowing the igloo does not need to last forever. It only needs to last tonight. Your eyelids sag, the dogs shift, the lamp flickers. The rhythm of migration continues in your mind. Build, sleep, leave, build again, sleep again, leave again. A cycle unbroken, flowing like the aurora across the sky. And in that cycle, the igloo is not just shelter, it is rhythm itself, heartbeat of survival in brutal winters. The dome holds steady, the lamp whispers, and your mind wanders far beyond the snow walls. You begin to wonder how life in this frozen shelter compares to the huts and cottages of medieval Europe. Across seas and centuries, people lay down to sleep in utterly different structures, yet their nights were shaped by the same search for warmth. One well-documented account describes how peasants in northern Europe often lived in single-room wooden huts, smoke curling from hearths that rarely stopped burning. Families and animals alike huddled together on straw pallets, the air thick with soot. You picture the contrast. Smoky rafters dripping with condensation, compared with your igloo's luminous snow dome. Both crude, both ingenious, both homes. Here's a curious little side note. While igloo dwellers used snow as insulation, Europeans sometimes packed their timber walls with mud and dung, the mixture hardening into a surprisingly effective barrier against drafts. It smelled earthy, sometimes unpleasant, but it worked. You imagine a traveler from one world stepping into the other, amazed to find warmth achieved through dung in one place and snow in another. Survival makes inventors of everyone. Experts remain divided over which homes were better for health. Some argue European huts, though smoky, allowed steadier air circulation and more fuel for fire. Others point out that igloos, despite their fragility, provided superior insulation and protection against storms. The comparison is endlessly debated in academic circles, each side emphasizing different strengths. But lying here, pressed into furs, you know the answer depends less on theory and more on context. In the Arctic, nothing matched snow. You picture a medieval farmer, tired after a day of threshing grain, collapsing onto straw near a smoky fire. His nose stings from soot, his throat rasps, but he is alive. Then you return to the igloo, where your nose tingles from seal oil smoke, your skin pressed against hides, and you realize both nights carry the same truth. The body adapts. Comfort is not measured in degrees, but in the difference between freezing and sleeping. A whimsical thought makes you chuckle inwardly. Perhaps if a medieval monk had been carried north by some miracle, he would have written in astonishment about snow houses glowing like sapphire lanterns, calling them ice chapels, and perhaps an Inuit hunter, carried south, would have laughed at smoky huts, wondering how anyone could breathe in such haze. Each would marvel at the other's normality, and both would still fall asleep because exhaustion makes every shelter sacred. Anthropologists continue to puzzle over cultural perceptions of cold. To the Arctic families, snow was not enemy but ally, something to sculpt into walls and embrace. To Europeans, snow was misery, damp and deadly, a season to be feared. These contrasting attitudes shaped architecture as much as materials did. And you realize, listening to the hush of your igloo, that the difference lay not in the cold itself, but in how people chose to meet it. The dogs sigh, the lamp flickers, and you close your eyes again. For a moment, you imagine yourself slipping between the two worlds. Half in a snow dome glowing with aurora, half in a timber hut buzzing with sparks from a fire. Two very different shelters, two very different ways of enduring, but both carrying the same heartbeat of survival. And as you sink deeper into the furs, you understand something comforting, whether in wood or snow, dung or hides, lamp or hearth. People in every land have always carried the same bedtime wish that morning will come, that walls will hold, that warmth will last long enough to dream. The night deepens, and as you lie there, thoughts drift toward origins. Who, you wonder, was the first to carve snow into a home? Did one desperate hunter, caught in a storm centuries ago, scoop blocks by instinct, stack them in a hasty dome, and wake astonished to find himself alive? Or was it slower, a gradual shaping of techniques passed hand to hand until the igloo became art as much as necessity? A respected thread in ethnographic research points out that no written records survive from the medieval Arctic itself. Instead, we piece stories together from later explorers, oral tradition, and the material fragments left behind. These tell us that igloos were already sophisticated when Europeans first described them, suggesting a much older origin. Yet the precise beginnings remain hidden, like footprints erased by drifting snow. Here's a curious note. Some oral histories hint that knowledge of igloo building was not evenly spread. Certain clans, certain families, were renowned for their skill, passing the art down almost like a guarded craft. To marry into such a family was to inherit not just partners, but blueprints for survival. Imagine the pride of a child cutting their first block under a parent's watchful eye, knowing that each slice of snow was a piece of inherited wisdom. Specialists remain divided on whether igloos evolved independently across regions or spread outward from a central origin. Some argue the technique was discovered multiple times, born naturally from snow's properties. Others believe it radiated from one cultural hub, passed along trade and hunting routes. Archaeologists point to similarities across vast distances, but similarity does not prove connection. The discussion continues, as cold and elusive as the snow itself. You press your palm against the wall, feeling its cold firmness. Whoever first discovered the secret, they handed humanity one of its simplest and most elegant inventions. A house of snow that breathes warmth. A shelter made of the very thing it protects you from. It is as counterintuitive as it is brilliant. Think of medieval Europe again. There, the origins of timber framing, stone castles, and thatched roofs can be traced, debated, documented. Architects left treatises, builders carved marks into beams. But here, in the Arctic, the inventors left no parchment, no signatures. Their art melted every spring, vanishing back into the landscape. Knowledge survived, not in stone but in practice, carried in hands rather than words. A whimsical thought surfaces. Perhaps the very first igloo builder was laughed at by companions. A house of snow? You'll freeze twice as fast. But then the storm passed, and the doubters saw the builder emerge, alive and warm. Maybe that was how tradition began, not in triumph, but in surprise. Survival became proof, and proof became habit. Anthropologists remain intrigued by how cultural memory preserves such fragile practices. Stories endure where walls cannot. Parents taught children block angles, lamp placement, vent openings, all without ever writing a word. You realize now that the igloo itself was both shelter and school, its construction a lesson each generation had to master anew. You breathe deeply, the lamp smoke curling into your lungs, and your gratitude grows not only for the builders of this dome, but for the unknown inventors long ago. Their names are lost, but their wisdom wraps around you still. You sleep tonight inside their discovery, alive because someone once dared to see snow not as enemy, but as ally. The storm rattles faintly outside. The dome holds steady, and in its steady hum you sense not just your own survival, but the echo of countless nights before yours, each one preserved in the silent legacy of snow. The lamp crackles faintly, and your gaze drifts to the walls. In their bluish sheen, you notice odd patches, shadows that are not quite shadows, small frozen bulges glistening like trapped jewels. You lean closer in your imagination and see something startling. A fish's tail, frozen solid into the wall, its scales dulled by frost. You blink. Did someone wedge it there as storage? Or did the snow itself swallow it during building, leaving it suspended like a relic? One account from later Arctic travelers notes the discovery of strange items sealed inside snow houses. Bits of food, bones, even forgotten tools sometimes froze into the walls, preserved for days or weeks until thaw released them. In a land where nothing was wasted, even an accident could become storage. You imagine waking in the night, plucking a frozen fish from the wall, and gnawing it back to life with hunger's determination. Here's a curious side note. Children sometimes treated such frozen finds as treasures. A fishtail sticking from the wall became a toy, a secret snack, or a piece of play pretend, held in mittened hands until an adult noticed and shook their head. You smile at the thought, amused by the idea of igloo walls doubling as cupboards for surprises. Archaeologists remain uncertain about how often these oddities were intentional. Did builders wedge extra supplies into the blocks deliberately, or were they accidents from rushed construction? Some specialists argue that Igloo pantries existed, while others dismissed them as anecdotal exaggerations. The disagreement remains, a reminder that daily life leaves traces as confusing as they are fascinating. You run your hand along the imagined wall, feeling the cold bumps beneath the smooth snow. Each protrusion tells a hidden story. A bone chipped into the wall might have been left after a hasty meal. A broken tool frozen there could mark a night when repairs had to wait until morning. Each object, sealed in ice, becomes a time capsule of survival. Compare this to medieval Europe's cottages, where walls of wattle and daub often held lost trinkets, coins, or bits of pottery, later discovered centuries afterward by archaeologists. In both cases, walls became accidental archives, storing the mundane alongside the extraordinary. Snow may melt, mud may crumble, but both carry the fingerprints of daily life. A whimsical image arises. Perhaps a child, half asleep, reached out in the dark and touched something cold and hard in the wall, only to pull away with a squeal, a frozen fish nose pressing back at them. The family laughed, and the story was told for years. Remember the night the wall grew a fish? Even hardship needs humor, and the igloo gave it in unexpected ways. Specialists continue to argue about whether these finds should be read as evidence of storage habits or mere oddities. But the truth, you sense, is simpler. In a place where every scrap mattered, nothing went to waste. If the wall held food or tools, they were used. If it held nothing but snow, it still carried stories. You close your eyes, imagining walls glittering with frozen relics, each one a reminder that life is messy, imperfect, improvisational. Survival is not neat rows of supplies in storerooms, but bones tucked in corners, fishtails poking from walls, laughter and mistakes mingling with hunger and need. The igloo breathes around you, glowing faintly, holding not only warmth but memory, and as you drift again towards slumber, you understand every wall, every block, carries more than snow. It carries the hidden fragments of human life, sealed in ice, waiting to whisper their stories long after the people who lived them are gone. The lamp burns lower, its flame no more than a trembling bead of light. Around you, the igloo grows hushed once more, and you sense the final rituals of the night unfolding. These were not grand ceremonies, not feasts or festivals, but the quiet habits repeated every evening before surrendering to sleep. You roll onto your side, watching in your imagination as the family moves through gestures shaped by countless winters. One dependable note from ethnographic accounts is that many Arctic families practice silence before bed. After stories ended and laughter faded, a calm descended. Some whispered brief thanks to the animals that fed them, or to unseen spirits guarding their camp. Others simply sat, eyes closed, letting their minds settle as their breath clouded the cold air. The ritual was not spoken of as ritual, it was simply life, the natural pause before sleep. Here's an unusual detail that flickers in memory. Some hunters hummed softly as they lay down, low, repetitive tones that seemed to blend with the lamp's hiss. The sound was not music in the formal sense, but it soothed, masking the groan of shifting snow or the howl of distant wind. You imagine that hum now, a steady note vibrating through the dome, a lullaby shared between breath and flame. Researchers remain divided on whether such practices should be understood as religious or merely habitual. Did families believe they were inviting protection from spirits, or were they simply comforting themselves through routine? Some anthropologists argue the line between the two was meaningless. Comfort itself was sacred in an environment where every small habit helped survival. You shift deeper beneath the hides, picturing each step. The lamp wick is trimmed, adjusted so it will last until dawn. The vent above is checked, a finger brushing snow to ensure air can flow. Children are tucked more tightly into furs, a parent's hand resting briefly on each brow. Dogs are nudged into corners where their warmth will spread evenly. These simple motions, performed night after night, become incantations as reliable as any prayer. Compare this with medieval Europe, where villagers crossed themselves before bed, whispered paternosters, or hung charms by doors. In both worlds, rituals transformed vulnerability into reassurance. To close your eyes in winter darkness required faith, whether in God, in spirits, in family, or in routine. Humans everywhere stitched comfort from repetition. A whimsical picture forms in your mind. Perhaps a child, resisting sleep, invented their own ritual, arranging tiny pebbles in a circle by the bed, or counting breaths until they reached 10. Parents might have smiled, recognizing in that private act the universal need for order in a chaotic world. Even in snow houses, imagination shaped rituals as surely as adults did. Archaeologists continue to puzzle over traces of such practices. A small carved charm found near sleeping ledges, was it a toy, a ritual object, or both? Burn marks near entrances, were they practical or ceremonial? These questions remain unanswered, shadows at the edge of certainty. Yet the silence of the igloo speaks just as clearly. Habits themselves left little behind, but they lived in the rhythm of nights like this. The lamp flickers once more, the hum of breath thickens, and the dome folds itself into stillness. You feel your own pulse slow, your body surrendering to the ritual of rest. No one announces the moment, but everyone knows it, the transition from wakefulness to dream. The igloo itself seems to exhale, sighing into quiet. And as your eyelids sag, you realize the rituals matter not because they guarantee survival, but because they make surrender possible. They tell the mind, it is safe enough to sleep. In a world of constant risk, that belief is the greatest gift of all. The silence thickens until it is almost heavy, a blanket pressing as surely as the hides around you. Sleep would claim you fully, except you remain aware that safety is never absolute. Even in slumber, danger can stir. You picture the hunters who lay down with spears within arm's reach, half dreaming, half waiting, always listening for the faintest crack or paw outside. The igloo is warm, yes, but it is no fortress. One solid note from explorers' journals describes how hunters trained themselves to wake at the faintest sound. Dog growls, a change in the lamp's hiss, the whistle of wind shifting direction. Some men swore they could rouse from deep sleep the instant danger approached, a reflex born from years of nights in fragile shelters. You imagine the tension of such slumber, never entirely soft, like a bowstring pulled but not released. Here's an odd glimpse, preserved in oral accounts. Children sometimes played games imitating their fathers, pretending to wake with a start, grabbing imaginary spears, barking orders at invisible intruders. What for the adults was survival became, for the young, a kind of rehearsal in play. You smile at the thought, laughter preparing them for fear, games weaving lessons into muscle memory. Academics still disagree on how often hunters truly faced nocturnal threats. Were raids by wolves and bears common? Or were they rare but memorable, magnified by story? Some argue that vigilance was more symbolic than practical, a way of keeping discipline sharp. Others insist that the risk was real enough to shape nightly behavior. The lack of hard evidence leaves the question open, but you feel in your bones that the habit of caution itself was proof of danger. You picture the moment of waking, a rustle in the snow, a growl from a dog, eyes snap open, hands reach for spear, the lamp flame quivers, throwing jagged shadows across the dome. For a heartbeat, the entire family is caught between sleep and survival. If nothing happens, they exhale and drift back down. If something breaks through, they are ready. It is a dance of vigilance, repeated night after night. Contrast this with medieval Europe, where soldiers in campaign tents kept weapons close, and villagers posted watchmen at town gates. Whether in forests or tundra, the night was never fully trusted. Sleep itself was an act of bravery, softened only by the hope that someone or something would wake in time. A whimsical image surfaces. Perhaps an elder, weary of constant vigilance, joked that even the walls themselves stood guard. "The snow is listening," he might mutter, "and it will wake me if danger comes." Children would giggle, but maybe, in their hearts, they believed it. Belief alone could calm fears enough to let sleep return. Archaeologists remain uncertain about the placement of weapons inside igloos. Some evidence suggests spears and harpoons rested against the wall near the sleeping ledges. Others argue they were stored outside with sleds. Either way, the mindset is clear. Tools of survival were never far. Sleep was never without readiness. You turn onto your side, the imagined weight of a spear near your hand. The dogs sigh again. The lamp glows faintly, and the snow creaks as it always does. No danger tonight. But the readiness itself comforts you, as though by imagining vigilance you have joined in the long chain of hunters before you. Sleep may soften the body, but it never fully closes the mind, and in that twilight state, you feel both safe and watchful, balanced like the lamp flame trembling on its wick. The dome breathes around you, steady and fragile. You let your own breath match it, drifting toward dreams, yet knowing that, should danger stir, you too could wake. In the Arctic, that was survival, resting with one eye half open, trusting warmth but keeping readiness at hand. At last the night stretches thin, and the silence begins to shift. You sense it before you see it, a faint change in the air, a whisper of brightness pressing through the snow. You open your eyes, and there it is, the first pale glow of dawn filtering through the dome. It is not golden, not the rosy light of southern mornings, but a bluish shimmer, soft and ghostly, seeping through the blocks above. One consistent observation from Arctic travelers is that igloos acted like lanterns at daybreak. As the sun rose, the walls glowed from within, bathing sleepers in diffuse light. You feel it now, brushing your face gently, as though the snow itself has become a window. In a world without clocks, this glow was a signal morning had come. Another night survived. Here's a curious little note. Children sometimes woke before adults, enchanted by the play of light on the walls. They traced shapes with their fingers, pretending the glow was a living spirit. In some tales, they believed the light carried messages from ancestors, a reminder that the world outside still turned. You can almost see a boy pressing his small palm against the ceiling, whispering secrets to the dawn. Scholars continue to debate how reliable the snow glow was as a timekeeper. Some argue that on stormy days, the light was too dim to tell, forcing families to guess. Others suggest that even slight differences in brightness were enough for practiced eyes to judge. The discussion remains unresolved, but lying here in the imagined dome, you believe it, your body knows that morning has come. You notice the changes in sound, too. The howling of night winds eases into gentler gusts. Dogs stir, shaking snow from their fur. A child yawns, stretching, their voice echoing softly against the curved walls. The igloo awakens not with bells or roosters, but with breath, glow, and faint crackle. Think of medieval Europe, where dawnlight crept through shutters and smoke holes, rousing peasants to fields and lords to prayers. In both huts and igloos, the day began not with fanfare but with the steady return of light. Across worlds, dawn carried the same message. You lived through the night, now rise and endure again. A whimsical thought crosses your mind. Perhaps dawn was greeted almost like a guest, slipping through snow walls politely, never barging in. Families may have whispered good morning to it, grateful for its return. You imagine an elder, muttering, half asleep, "The light has found us again." Archaeologists remain intrigued by the interplay of snow and Sunday igloos, they note, could turn fierce light into gentleness, protecting eyes from glare while still allowing brightness through. This property fascinates modern architects, who marvel that medieval snow homes achieved effects that glass and design now try to replicate. Yet the science was lived, not studied, an accident of survival that became beauty. You stretch beneath the hides, basking in the pale glow. It is not warm, not yet, but it is hope made visible. The night was long, filled with creaks, stories, spirits, and hunger, yet the snow walls held. Light seeps in, proof that time has moved, that morning exists even in brutal winters. And as you let your eyes close again, you realize dawn is not merely the start of another day, it is the reward. Every blue shimmer through the snow is a victory. Quiet, but immense. You survived. The family survived. And the dome, still glowing, has done its work once more. The bluish light grows stronger, and the igloo begins to stir. What was stillness only hours ago is now motion. Furs are pushed aside, boots tugged on, voices rise low and practical. You blink, feeling the rhythm of departure take shape. For though the dome has held through the night, it was never meant to last forever. Igloos are shelters of necessity, not monuments. Morning means packing, preparing, moving on. One well-documented practice noted by explorers is that families dismantled or abandoned igloos without ceremony. They did not mourn their snow houses. Once the lamp was extinguished and supplies loaded, the dome was left to the weather. Within days or weeks it would sag and collapse, erased by drifting snow. In a world where permanence was impossible, impermanence became normal. You feel the poignancy of this as you watch, in imagination, the dome already fading in your mind before you step outside. Here's a curious observation. Sometimes people deliberately broke a hole in the wall before leaving, preventing curious animals from burrowing in and fouling the space. It was a gesture of practicality, not destruction. You picture a hunter striking the snow wall with a harpoon butt, a single sharp blow cracking what had cradled them all night. Strange, that gratitude and demolition could arrive in the same motion. Historians still argue whether entire family groups traveled together in long lines of sleds or whether small hunting parties broke away, each building and leaving igloos independently. Evidence exists for both, but certainty eludes. What is clear is that movement defined survival. The igloo was always chapter, never book. You imagine the departure now. Dogs are harnessed, yelping with impatience. Sleds creak as they're loaded. Children stumble sleepily, clutching furs. Adults check tools, lash bundles, kick snow from boots. The lamp's wick is pinched. The flame dies, leaving only faint smoke. A hush falls for one last heartbeat inside the dome. Then the flap of the entrance lifts, and cold air rushes in, biting your skin like teeth. Outside, the morning dazzles white fields stretching forever, sky pale with the faint fire of a sun too weak to warm. The igloo behind you glows faintly still, but already it seems smaller, less essential, as though its purpose has been completed. You know that within hours, drifting snow will begin to erase it. Within days, no trace will remain. Yet you carry its warmth in your bones, its memory pressed into your skin. In medieval Europe, homes stood for generations, built to outlast lifetimes. Families carved their names into beams, left prayers scratched into plaster. Here, by contrast, nothing was inscribed, nothing preserved. Snow swallowed every effort, yet in a strange way, this gave freedom. You were never bound to one place. Each new dome was a fresh start, a new promise. A whimsical image stirs. Perhaps a child, reluctant to leave, pressed a handprint into the wall before stepping out. That print would last only hours, maybe days, but in that moment it was defiance against impermanence. I was here. You can almost see the tiny palm glowing in the blue wall, a farewell gesture to the house that kept them alive. Anthropologists debate whether people felt emotional attachment to igloos. Some argue they were purely practical, valued only for warmth. Others suggest affection existed, that families remembered particular domes, the one where we survived the great storm, the one where the baby took her first steps. The truth, you sense, is likely both. Humans rarely leave shelters without some echo of feeling. You watch the family depart, sleds sliding into the vast horizon. The igloo shrinks behind them, until it is only a bump in endless snow. Soon, even that will vanish. But you realize the house was never meant to be remembered in form. It lives instead in the rhythm of migration, the cycle of building, sleeping, leaving. The igloo endures not as structure but as practice, as knowledge, as continuity. You take one last breath of its scent in your mind. Seal oil, smoke, hides, snow, and breath. Then you too turn away, following the sleds into the blinding light. The dome stands behind you, silent, temporary, eternal in memory. The snow crunches beneath your boots, sleds groan under their loads, and the family's voices fade into the distance. Yet behind you, the dome remains, a lonely bulge on the endless white. You pause for one last glance, knowing this night was the final one spent inside that shelter. It feels both triumphant and melancholy. The igloo held. It gave warmth, it kept life alive, and now its work is done. One reliable note from explorers tells how a final night in a snow house carried weight. Not ceremony exactly, but awareness. Hunters and families knew the journey ahead would bring another shelter, another dome, but none quite like the one just left. Each igloo was unique, shaped by weather, by snow quality, by the hands that built it. Leaving one behind meant leaving behind a moment of history, irretrievable once the winds took it. Here's a curious tidbit preserved in oral tradition. Some children believed igloos themselves could dream after families left. If you listened closely, they whispered, you might hear the snow sigh as it drifted back to the earth. A fanciful thought, yet oddly comforting. It meant the shelter had its own spirit, grateful for the lives it saved. Scholars remain uncertain how people framed the end of such shelters in the medieval centuries. Did they mark departures with ritual, or did they treat it as practical necessity alone? Some anthropologists believe traces of ritual linger in myths about snow spirits, while others insist the process was entirely pragmatic. The debate continues, suspended like the faint smoke that still hangs in your imagination, inside the abandoned dome. You picture that last night vividly. The lamp flickering low, children pressed deep into hides, adults whispering their final words of the day. Outside, the aurora swirled, winds rattled, animals prowled, yet the igloo cradled everyone until dawn. The walls glowed with morning light, and then life moved on. That was the rhythm. Build, endure, leave. In medieval Europe, homes lasted through generations, the same fires burning in the same hearths for centuries. But here, permanence was impossible. What families carried was not a building, but knowledge, the skill to shape snow, to cut blocks, to balance warmth and breath, to survive together. The igloo did not endure in stone, but in memory, in hands, in practice. That was its true legacy. A whimsical vision enters your mind. Perhaps the last person out sometimes whispered thank you into the snow, pressing palm to wall before leaving. No one recorded such gestures, but you sense their possibility. Gratitude is as old as survival, and even in the harshest world, a final touch of thanks would not be out of place. Archaeologists find little to mark these goodbyes. Collapsed domes leave few traces beyond faint rings in the snow, gone by spring. Yet in their absence lies a lesson. Impermanence does not erase meaning. Each igloo that vanished still mattered, because it carried life through another night, another storm, another winter. You turn away at last in your imagination, following the family as they move across the tundra. Behind you, the igloo grows smaller, until it disappears into the horizon. Ahead lies only white, only sky, only the promise of another shelter, another night, another survival. The rhythm continues. And as you walk, you realize the igloo was never just snow. It was humanity distilled ingenuity, resilience, intimacy, fear, laughter, ritual, and hope, all sealed within fragile walls that vanished with the seasons. It was proof that even in the most brutal winters, people carved life from cold itself. And now, as the story closes, let yourself soften. The images of snow walls, flickering lamps, and quiet breath fade slowly into the distance, like the family walking across the tundra. Imagine the igloo behind you melting gently under the pale light of day, its dome sagging, its purpose fulfilled. There is no violence in its end, only release, a return to the snow from which it came. Your body grows heavy, your breath slower. Each inhale cool as the Arctic air, each exhale warm as the oil lamps glow. The rhythm steadies you, eases you, pulls you deeper into rest. The noises of the night, the creak of snow, the laughter of children, the whisper of wind fade into a hush so deep it feels like the earth itself is sleeping. Let your thoughts drift like snowflakes, floating, weightless, dissolving as they touch the ground. There is no urgency now, no danger pressing, only the memory of survival, of warmth won against the cold. You are safe here, wrapped in hides, wrapped in story, wrapped in time. And as your eyelids grow heavy, imagine the snow dome above you glowing faintly blue, a lantern of peace. The world outside may be fierce, but inside you carry calm. Carry it with you into sleep, into dreams, into morning. Good night, sweet dreams.